Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. I was a little bit early, but do appreciate you coming and engaging in a pretty interesting conversation and a pretty important charter that I see for this council. Just as I always start our meetings at the company, safety moment in terms of if there's ever a problem here, the exits are over here, down the stairs. You're supposed to muster over at the Salmon Springs Fountains. We don't expect anything, but we always like to be prepared, so that's important. We've got a really busy agenda, and we're going to try to keep it on task. We have one time constraint with John, and so we're going to make sure we get to John because I think he has some pretty important information for us to share. Where'd Mark disappeared? The pressure to perform, I think. This council got announced on October 17th, and I think it's got a real important mission. And we'll talk about the charter later. But in terms of the key metrics that we were asked to address was really what is it going to take to double the percentage of students in 4th and 8th grade who are proficient in advanced in mathematics and science, and also to double the number of students who earn a post-secondary degree requiring proficiency in science, technology, engineering, and math. Pretty important challenges. We obviously know how important this is to the state. This is a journey that we're going to go on together, and hopefully we can make a difference for the state. I thought when we start, you have in your package you have an agenda for the meeting and a lot of material that Mark has put together, and a lot of this you just got yesterday, so we're not going to necessarily make decisions on it today, but we will look for feedback both now and in the coming weeks, and then we'd like to finalize some of these as we go forward. So what we thought we would do is start with introductions, first of the council, and just a chance to introduce. We do have someone on the phone, right?
We should.
Jeanette? Is Jessica? Jessica, you on the phone? No, she hasn't joined us. Maybe she'll join us. So why don't we just go around and do some introductions, and then we'll introduce the people around the outside of the table. There's Jessica. Jessica?
Hello.
Hi, this is Jessica Gilbert.
Hi, Jessica. We're just getting started. We're going to go around and do introductions. We will let you go last in terms of around the table of the council members, and then we also will do introductions of the people on the outside of the room. So let me just start, and really what we're trying to do is just get a sense of why you're here and what your interest is in this important effort. So again, Jim Pyra, I'm the president and CEO of Portland General Electric. And kind of my interest in this is I actually went to Benson High School, so I had a pretty good education in CTE, and then I went to Oregon State and majored in civil engineering and have been an engineer for a number of years until I transitioned to the financial area. But for our company, CTE is really important because we need a number of engineers to do our work at Portland General, and we also need linemen who need those skills that come out of CTE. I also see the importance of this to the jobs and the economy, so that's why I'm here and really want to make a difference, because at the end of the day it really is about good paying jobs for our younger kids as they grow up. So why don't we go this way? You can go next. Yeah.
I'm Aubrey Clark with Intel Corporation. I manage our education outreach, so I'm passionate about science, technology, engineering, and math because Intel obviously is very involved, and as Jim mentioned, we're very interested in seeing our students succeed, and so we can hire them when they come out of our school system. I was talking earlier about the importance of rural and getting out into the state, because we focus, more of my job focuses specifically in the metropolitan area, and growing up in a rural town, I just think it's important to move everything and scale all these great opportunities that are happening.
Good morning. My name is Herb Fricky. I'm president of Cooper Zeitz Engineers. I'm a Native American, or Native American-owned business, and I'm a civil and environmental engineer. And my interest goes way back to my family and my extended family with my tribe. I'm a member of the 3 affiliated tribes, which is Fort Berthold, North Dakota. But I've been living in Portland area, the Northwest, since 20 or so. But my passion is about bringing Native Americans into the STEM field, which is kind of a non-traditional area or career area for Native Americans. To me, the outreach is really critical, primarily onto the reservations where there are fewer opportunities there for careers in STEM. So part of my interest is not only bringing students into the STEM field, but increasing opportunities for them to have jobs on reservations as well. Thank you.
My name is Dwayne Johnson. I am president of Ideal Portland and Globe Creek Ventures. Ideal Portland is an organization that's focused on inclusion in the innovation economy. So basically, how do we create and get more STEM-educated innovators and entrepreneurs from a more diverse population? So my background is that I actually started programming when I was pretty young. I was probably in like 8th or 9th grade. I saw a computer terminal over in the corner, and I said, "What was that?" And they said, "Don't touch it." So of course I had to know what that was. So by the time I graduated from high school, I knew probably about 22 different programming languages. We were writing programs for our teachers, to do, since we take care of inventory, do the grades, all those sort of things. All through my career, I was pretty much one of the only people of color or women in tech. So, I like to have other people around me, but B, I recognize opportunities that are available there, because I did my stint in Silicon Valley. I started several companies, been part of several high-growth companies, and again, the same story. We recognize that this is one of the drivers of our economy. It's where the future is, and we want to actually make more opportunities available for the entire population. So that's why I'm here, to actually have that happen. Thanks.
I'm Thompson Morrison. I am the co-founder of a company called Fuse Insight. I'm also on the board of directors of the Technology Association, TAO. As that role, over the last 5 years, I've helped guide the strategy for the organization, particularly in the area of economic development, and our role as an industry to help build our technology-based industries here in Oregon. About a year ago, I was asked to also take over as the chair of the Education Foundation for the association. TechStart Education Foundation is the name. And the reason that I was asked to take that over is that we as an industry began to more deeply appreciate how our growth was being constrained by the lack of talent, and that we had reached a point of crisis. So we recognized that we as an industry needed to engage in the educational institutions in ways that were out of the box, innovative, ways that brought our culture into the educational system. So as part of our initiatives, last year we launched a program with a high school where we actively brought our resources within the industry into the high school and began to engage the students in ways that hadn't been done before. And out of that grew the concept of an Innovation Academy. Innovation Academy allowed the kids to begin to identify problems that they wanted to solve, problems that were meaningful for them, and paired them with mentors from the industry to solve those problems. And so we began to realize that it was not just project-based learning that we were uncovering. It was really what we call purpose-driven learning. And that sense of purpose in these kids allowed them to unleash their creative genius. That was astonishing and surprising for all those around them, for the educators and for the mentors themselves. So we began to expand on that and began to actually move that concept of the Innovation Academies into multiple high schools around the state. In fact, we now have 8 high schools. And what we've done in that process is to identify our greatest assets within the schools, which are, we have a core cohort of very strong CS teachers, a very small cohort, but a very strong one. So we began to bring them together and to co-imagine with them how they can go and partner more effectively with the industry. So we have been in that process really looking to kind of rethink our way as an industry to step up and be involved.
Thank you. Thanks. Nancy, we'll come back to you at the end as you get into the kickoff. Since we all report to you anyway.
She doesn't even need a name tag. My name is Eric Meslow. I'm the president and CEO of TimberCon, which is a high-tech firm down in Tualatin. My journey on this endeavor really started a number of years ago basically based on need. My company was struggling dramatically to get talent in that could support my growth. I was recruited by Bruce Schaefer to join ETIC, which is the Engineering and Technology Industry Council. And from there, I just got deeper and deeper and pulled me in, so to speak. I also sit on TAO's board of directors, the board of directors of the Pacific Northwest Defense Coalition, Oregon Inc., and I'm currently the chair of ETIC. So I guess the last one would be I'm also the co-chair of the Oregon STEM Employers Coalition. So right now I'd like to give a shout out to my business partner who basically runs the company while I do all these other things. Anyhow, it's been a great fight. This is a culmination of a lot of hard work over the last probably 6 years, and I'm excited to be here today and see where this goes.
All right, so my name is Lisa Graham. I'm a senior vice president at Bend Research. That's primarily a pharmaceutical research company over in Bend, Oregon. I'm a chemical engineer by training and a graduate of Corvallis High School in Oregon State. So I feel like over the years I've had a lot of opportunities with math and science teachers to help me get to do everything I've done. At this point, I've worked in pulp and paper and wafer manufacturing and hard chemicals, and now I'm in pharma. I mean, what a cool background, right? To get to do all
Engineers
that.
can do anything, right?
You know, so to me, I look at the really neat fields coming out, especially a lot of the companies a lot of you run, and you know, what a great opportunity for our kids to have a real reason to get out of bed when they get to be an adult. So between working on ETIC, I see this now as a real opportunity to, like you said, Aubrey, get outside of a certain area and really see what we can do.
Jessica, do you want to introduce?
Oh, okay. So I'm Jessica Gomez. I'm the founder and CEO of Rogue Valley Microdevices. We make microchips. Let's see. Gosh, I got started in this industry while I was in college. I wanted to be an engineer, but I ended up getting a job as a lab operator and ended up doing a lot of on-the-job training, and eventually went on to start this company along with my husband. I really, because through the sort of startup process of founding this company, I got really interested in economic development and encouraging entrepreneurship, and especially in the tech sector, because I think that is an area that has the real potential to provide higher paid jobs and create some really cool, innovative products. So I was a co-founder of this organization called Signal Valley Technology Group. And we have an incubator and are doing some really kind of innovative stuff with grants. I'm really interested in sort of encouraging that process early to build that culture of entrepreneurship and science and technology early on. Because I think that, if you start in, college, it's almost, you're really missing that whole sort of experience of having that as part of your life as a kid. And I think that's really, really important if we're going to really develop innovative engineers and creative engineers, which is what we really need. We need problem solvers. So anyway, that's why I'm here. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to work with everyone.
Thanks, Jessica. Before we do, Mark and Nancy, let's go around the room. Just introduce yourself and who you're with or who you're representing. We'll just start over there.
Mark Clifford, I'm the director of the ACE Academy.
I'm Brent Wilder with the Oregon Alliance of Independent Colleges and Universities.
It's Mary Maslow with Oregon After School for Kids.
Whitney Groves, Chief of Staff for the OEIU.
John Toponiak, Northwest.
I'm July, Oregon Business Council.
Charles Smith, I teach computer science at Sherwood High School.
Cheryl Hagstead, I'm principal of the Beaver School.
Laura McKinney, Executive Director of the Teaching and West. Amy Wong Wilker, I'm on the board of Girls Inc.
Greg Nyland, science teacher.
Beverly Stein, I'm the Oregon Business Council.
John Niebergall, Sherwood High School classroom C2 teacher.
I'm Jennifer Davidson from Montessori Northwest.
John Kadegi, Montessori Northwest also.
Jamie Roman, STEM Education Specialist at ODU.
Bruce Schaefer, Director of STEM Collaborations for the University System. Seth Allen, Staff for Oregon Education Investment Board. Alan Faust, Editorial School Board.
Chris Harker, Oregon Legislature. Joel Fisher, Oregon Business Association.
I'm Kyle Richie Knoll with the Oregon Business Council and the Oregon STEM Employer Coalition.
I'm Janice Hill from Hillsborough School District, elementary principal.
I'm Sandra Williams. I'm with Portland Community College, department chair of electronics engineering technology.
John Pierce, Board Chair with iUrban Team.
Jason Kowalski, Chair of the Biology Department at Portland State.
Lynn Schusterman, Portland State STEM Liaison and member of the Chemistry Department.
Carol Morse, Portland General Electric, and I'm chair of the All Hands Raised Board.
Charlie Hodson, the Oregon Department of Community Colleges and Workforce Development.
Kathy Camper, Multnomah County Library Youth Services.
Big changes for tomorrow's Aeronautical Museum, as well as participate in the East County, Multnomah County STEM initiative.
Thank you so much. Obviously well represented and a lot of good feedback we can get from you on what we're trying to accomplish. And I didn't see Chris come in the room, but thanks, Chris. Chris is kind of someone who helped this all happen, got the legislation through. We really appreciate your support on this and making this all happen. Hopefully we can deliver on what you're trying to accomplish. So thank you. We'll get to hear from you in a few minutes.
Team effort all the way along.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, I'm going to let Mark introduce himself, and then Mark can introduce Nancy, and we'll go into the second part of the agenda. So.
Great. My name is Mark Lewis. I'm the Director of STEM for the Chief Education Officer and the Oregon Education Investment Board. I come at this work with many different perspectives, having gone to a math and science university, a small one down in Los Angeles named Caltech, and then entering into the aerospace industry. I consider myself a recovering engineer. Once an engineer, you never quite let go of needing to solve problems. I think it's that dopamine hit that you get when you actually solve a problem and you want more of those. So I am a tinkerer and a problem solver by nature. I made the transition into becoming a high school math and science teacher, so I've seen this work from inside, outside, and alongside the education system, and I'm deeply passionate about STEM and the opportunity that it has for truly transforming the way we think about education and the both economic prosperity for the country and for communities, but also for those individuals. STEM in this day and age, STEM is really a passport to opportunity for many people. We have a number of jobs out there. But it's also a social justice issue of our day. Too many of our students aren't able to access those family wage earning jobs and to also follow their own creative passions. It's also a very complex society, and we need the critical thinkers and problem solvers to address energy issues, issues of food supply, issues of environment. So it's also that larger picture as well. And finally, for me, STEM is just plain fun, and it is a joy to be working in STEM fields and to make those connections across disciplines. And far too often we withhold those mysteries and that energy and that interesting aspects of STEMs from our youth and our children for far too long in our system. And I'm really, really excited by this work ahead of us and the opportunity to really blur those lines between community and classroom and to inspire a new generation of innovators. And my boss, Dr. Nancy Golden, Chief Education Officer, who's really leading the charge as a barrier buster for our systems. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. We're just thrilled to be here today. We've been really looking forward to this. I think about when we think of all the things we did, the work we did around STEM is really the most important, and I'm just thrilled that Representative Harker is here because he was one of the leaders in making sure there was a strategic investment in STEM. So thank you for your leadership. I'm thrilled you're in the room. Jim, I really want to thank you for taking on the chair. I know that means extra work for you, and like everyone around the table, you're a busy person, but I think you see the importance of the work. So I loved hearing about everyone as we went around. You know, it just reconfirms that we have just a sensational team of people who are really going to help us think about this, not only for our students, but for the industry and the state. We had so many great people to choose from, and we know we're going to have an advisory committee, and we can connect with many of those other people, but this just seems like the right people to get the work done. So I did want to make a few remarks, and I thought I would make them in context of this is a new publication, it's not a publication, pamphlet we put out around OEIB, and then in the end I'll tell you a little bit about my background. This was funded by the Nike Innovation Fund, so we really appreciate the partners that are helping us communicate about what does the OEIB do. And I say to everyone, is this about the cutest little boy in the world? I say the only one cuter is my grandchildren, your grandchildren, your children, or your neighbor's children, but, right? But really, when I ran around the room, if you look at the front of this, I think what we're saying is exactly what this says, is that prepared students is a prosperous Oregon. And a lot of comments people made, I heard people talking about they got into this work because there are not as many students skilled with the skills that you need for your businesses to be successful, and that we all need. In there later you'll see something from the governor, so everyone can achieve what he refers to as the American dream, the ability to have a life that allows you to make resources for yourself and for your family. This really speaks to, I think, what we're all wanting to say. And of course, the OEIB is a group that really creates policy and investment. Those are the two key things we're doing. So together, we'll be creating some very important policy, and my guess is at the end there'll need to be additional investment related to that policy. So I did want to just point to the pathway, and on this pathway you'll see that there are some priorities, and these are not priorities we picked out of the hat. These are what research tells us are really critically important for our students to move seamlessly into careers that you want and they want. And what's really important about this pathway is that students come to kindergarten ready to learn. They're reading at third grade level, because once we get that right, their ability to really successfully move along the pathway is astronomically better than if they didn't have those skills. The other thing is, we talk about STEM, what we know is that students being prepared for STEM career starts very early. I think it begins in kindergarten and even in preschool. I was in a preschool yesterday where I saw kids doing science exploration. 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, and I was very impressed with some of the problems they were solving. So, it starts at the very beginning, but we can't underestimate the set of basic skills students need right from the beginning to enhance their learning all along the way. So we're going to make sure we prepare students so they have the skills you need, and I think together we'll really figure out how to make STEM education about the best it can be in our state. And I like to think of us as we'll become leaders in the nation around STEM, because we certainly have the will and the intelligence to make that happen. I did want to talk just a little bit about, there's something else in this pamphlet which is really critical, and it talks about what's at stake. And again, I heard some people around the table talk about this. And this is really about our students who are in our communities of color, our migrant students, our English language learner students. And because we haven't provided all the resources they needed to be successful, we now find many of those students in the gap. And it is critical that we work to get these students out of the gap and get them prepared for the careers they want and you need. So I know that we'll be putting an extra focus on those students, and I know how critical their success is to our success. And I know Mark has great passion around that, as do many people around the table. The last thing I do want to point out in this pamphlet is just these 3 panels, because I think they're significant. It really talks about our role to advocate, and the OEIB is advocating to make sure we have a birth to college and career, or birth to career and college pathway. I know we'll be doing advocacy together as a result of this committee, and our job is to accelerate. And by accelerate, we're really talking about creating that seamless pathway in overcoming any of the barriers along the pathway. And that's why I'm being referred to as a barrier buster, because I've been all over the state learning about the hopes of the vision 40-40-20, but the barriers that currently are in the way. And that is our job, to really make sure we eliminate them with an eye on the future. You don't want to work on barriers, which are the current state, not the state you want, right? You want to work on what is the future, how do we get to the future, and how do we prevent barriers from coming, or if they're there, how do we really eliminate them? And then last piece is to engage. I refer to myself as a road warrior because I'm traveling all over engaging with communities. And 2 nights ago I was with the Latino community in Reynolds, and their hopes for their children are just amazing. In fact, it's really appropriate because I think this young woman did want to go into the sciences, and she's a DREAM Act child, which means she's undocumented, and we were talking about going to college, and she was telling me she wanted to go to Warner Pacific to begin with, and she was talking about how hard it is for students like her who now can get state tuition but can't get scholarships. And she had told me she had applied to Warner Pacific for a scholarship, and I was saying, you know, we really need to work on making college really accessible to you. And by the end of the speech, she came up to me and said, I got an email while you were talking, I got the scholarship. And we just like threw our arms around each other. And of course, I was crying because it doesn't take much when students succeed for me to tear up. But you know, it just really pointed out to me how much students really want to be successful and to engage in the careers that they know will help and make sure they and their family have the resources they need. So do know another thing we're doing is engagement. Now, in talking a little bit about my background, I spent most of my career as a teacher and then an administrator in K-12 systems. My most recent job was for a decade. I had the pure pleasure of being the superintendent of Springfield Public Schools. And like so many districts, we saw that STEM was where many of our students needed to go and wanted to go and excelled. And we did some early out things, I mean, that many schools are doing. I mean, the first thing is, I'll tell you, when I see a teacher who integrates math, science, technology, teach in a way that's hands-on and problem-solving, there's nothing I've seen better. It is electric in those classrooms. And I was in many of those classrooms. We also had a robotics team, and I know that's just part of it, but we saw kids engage in robotics. You couldn't get them to go home after school. 6 o'clock at night, they're still working on it. And then the other thing we did was water testing in our school district, and it was just great because actually farmers from the community would bring in their water to be tested, or just anyone from the community. And it was so interesting seeing young students talking to community members about science really being applied in the way it needed to be. So this is not only important, but I really think for students it's going to create enthusiasm and the kind of integrated project-based instruction we're really saying we need in all of our areas. So I think this is an opportunity beyond STEM. I think this is an opportunity about how do we really make education so it's proficiency-based, so it's project-based, so it's relevant and things. So then the other part of my career that's maybe relevant to this is that I did spend 6 years on the faculty at University of Oregon, and I was in policy, instruction, and assessment department, and I actually led the administrative licensure program, so training leaders to lead in our schools. And because OEIB is birth to career in college, I'm really happy that I did have 6 years at a university. It really helps me as I think through the whole pipeline. So thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on your selection. We're asking you to do a really huge task that's really going to make a difference for kids. And the last thing is, I heard you all talk about what you do, but I did hear enthusiasm for students in everything people were saying. So I appreciate that too, because they really need us to be partners in their future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy. Just to let you know, Fred could not make it today. He had a conflict, but Fred's here, the other member of the council, totally committed to this and really wants to make a difference also. So in your package, you have the agenda for the day, and today is kind of get us all in the same playing field in terms of where we are, get exposed to some data, get a sense of what our charter is, and really kind of get the base of how we're going to work together to discuss. So we're going to start with the agenda. And one thing I will tell you is, this is all about evidence-based programs, outcomes against metrics. We really need to drive this to a place. And so some of this information will help us understand kind of where we are and where we need to go. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John, who's going to give us some data that he's collected. And I'm not sure how that thing works. So
there we go.
There you go.
All right.
Just like that, magic.
There we go. Whoa. All right, so 17 slides in 15 minutes. We'll move through this briskly. We'll just call it a data appetizer, and then we can do this again another time. Oh, is that one? Hi.
Why don't I just sit?
Or I can move that. You sure? So, some work that was distributed. Also, the Employer STEM Coalition had a nice report that we collaborated with about a year ago or so. That has a fair amount of this information, but just steps through some key sort of high-level issues. What's the economic case for STEM? What's the demand for STEM skills in Oregon and the United States? And then what's the supply? So this is supply and demand. We'll move through this. The economic case. Here are, this is from Georgetown Center on Workforce, recent study on earnings of STEM and non-STEM occupations. You can see these $2 million lifetime earnings for computer occupations, engineers, physical life science, architects, etc., all way outdoing the other non-STEM. And what's underlying that is STEM occupations tend to be clustered in export traded sector activities that have big, huge value-added components to them. I'll point to Aubrey for an example. Her organization has lots of well-compensated engineers that are creating a tremendous amount of value for, and as are all the other companies here. So good earnings. Here's a history of wage growth, real wages in the 1980s and the 2000s. So that's how much wages grew for STEM workers. Here you can see non-STEM. And then again, from Georgetown, they came up with this term of STEM competitors, the health professions and managerial professional. And I don't really consider them to be competitors. I think those are folks that, frankly, many of them have STEM degrees and they've just used them in a different context. So the health professions have done well wage-wise. And frankly, a lot of managerial professions are engineers that go on to run companies. So good prospects for folks that get these kinds of degrees and these kinds of skills. Here is Georgetown's projection from starting in 2005, indexed to 2005 levels of employment levels for the key STEM occupations. You always have to sort of take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, in that it is the STEM occupations that are innovating and inventing jobs. And so you sort of go back to the 1992 Clinton Economic Summit right before he took office. All these smart people sat down and talked about the future of the economy, and I think if you go through that transcript, the word the internet was not uttered once. So, yes, I think there's a great prospect for lots of jobs here, but probably even more so if we're really good at educating people, we'll think of even more things to do. This is a percentage of the occupation that is composed of baby boomers with a BA plus by key areas. So this is basically saying, what about the potential, how many folks are going to be retiring in the near term out of these various areas? So education and K-12 and higher ed has an awful lot of baby boomers with BAs that are within sort of 5 to 10 years of retirement. STEM is next up, and I've heard you, Jim, talk about lots of folks in your company and other folks' companies around the the region that are looking at that issue as well. For Oregon specifically, here are the forecasts from the Employment Department on STEM occupations. This is sort of the need between 2010 and 2020. Their forecast of roughly 40,000 STEM occupations opening up. The red, this is across all of them, the red are simply the replacements. And this isn't just BA plus, this is across all education levels. And then the blue being the growth openings. And you can see the breakout for the other subsectors there. In terms of the supply of STEM degrees, so that was the demand. I think certainly plenty of demand, and even more if we succeed and grow this economy. Recent chart that we did on the concentration of degrees in Oregon. So for the first time ever, the American Community Survey, part of the census, started to ask about college majors beginning in 2009. So now we can sort of see where college majors reside across the United States. A colleague of mine took a look at that and looked across states and basically did a location quotient. If folks were equally distributed across the United States, how many would you expect to find in different places? And you can see clustered down here at the bottom where we're finding fewer than you would expect given the average distribution across the United States are an awful lot of STEM degrees. You've got physical sciences just right over the line, engineering just below it, mathematics, engineering, technical, computer, all down at the bottom. We have a robust supply of environmental and natural resource majors.
So is that graduates or is that
So
just
those are graduates in the population.
in the total population?
In the total population, state of Oregon, working age adults. Some good news here from the National Science Foundation. This is going to be one that we'll want to sort of peel back a little bit, is the number of science and engineering degrees. So this doesn't get all of the degrees that we're looking for. I think there might be missing some math and other technical degrees that we want to get at. But this was a report that I was
It's not like a really bad cold or anything.
able to pull easily. Going back to 1990 is the number of engineering and science degrees per 1,000 18 to 24-year-olds. This is the way that they came up with. So this is, think of that as the flow coming in. And you can see that Oregon has really sort of stepped up here and is producing more by that metric than Washington or the U.S. average. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were some intentional goals around that over the course of the last decade, and it appears that those have succeeded in that regard. Then we have this story, which is the pipeline of folks moving
I think
through.
people are surprised by that last graph.
I know.
You jumped past it pretty quickly.
I know.
So-
This one right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of surprised by it too. I'll admit it.
Are you sure about that?
I'll double check. If I can, I'll come back and apologize. 9 times out of 10, if I compare Oregon to Washington on something, it always seems like Washington comes up on the side that, other than the Duck Husky rivalry. So this is some work that we've done with a longitudinal database that Echo Northwest has collaborated with the Oregon Department of Education with. We have kids going back to 2003, and we can follow them through the National Post-Secondary Clearinghouse data. So this is basically saying what happened to the class of 2005. They were 10th graders. There were about 40,000 of them that took the 10th grade Oaks test in 2003-04, and we're able to follow them through to graduating from high school. Did they ever enroll in college? Did they ever receive any degree by 2011? And did they receive a STEM degree by 2011? And so there's a lot of interesting information behind this chart and these data where you can basically, we can go in and look at these 923 kids. So where did they go to school? Which high school did they attend? Are people coming out of certain high schools more likely to go into STEM than otherwise you would expect? The other piece here that is critical is virtually every one of the kids that ended up down here in the 923 beat the state benchmarks on math and science. there were 10, maybe 10% of these kids were some below the meat line. 90% of them were above. So the bottom line is, I don't know if Duncan Wise and his colleagues at the State Board of Education knew what they were doing, but that meat line is important. And that meat line basically is saying, if you're not across that meat line, the odds of your ending up in this are very, very low.
So who's the population here? This is all Oregon?
These were 40,000 10th graders.
10th grade, just across the
Oregon,
state?
Across the state, yeah.
And the degrees are any place, not just in the state, any
Correct.
degree? Okay.
Yeah,
So
public,
2%.
private, in-state, out-of-state. Right, and this will grow, Jim, if we give them more time, because we can keep following this group, 2012, 2000. Yeah. This will gradually sort of tick up some with time, but still relatively, obviously, a low percentage. Dwayne, to your point, we did take a look at this for African Americans, and the number here I can't report because it's less than 6 for 2005. In terms of NAEP proficiency, so very specifically the goal of doubling national assessment of the national standards test on math and science, 4th grade math. In terms of proficiency, we're in and around low 30s, and 8th grade bopping around at 25. So the goal then by 2025 would be to take this one to 50 and this one to 62. And then for science, they don't administer it as frequently. That, in terms of proficiency, was around 33-34% as well.
So if we took that and said one of our goals was to double the percentage of 4th and 8th grade proficiency, that would suggest that these are the benchmarks on this.
Correct.
You'd have to double these, so something like 60%, roughly 60%.
Exactly. And that is an absolutely critical piece, because what that previous chart said is, if you don't do that, those kids really don't have a shot.
Yeah.
Your first piece is to even give kids a shot at getting a STEM degree. And your second piece is, once they have the math and science skills to even have a shot, you got to get them interested in it. So they don't go off and
the last chart, the numbers, you look at that last chart, it's pretty dismal, 2%. Yeah. Maybe if you double it, it's 5%.
Right, yes.
So I'm not sure our metric is very good here in terms of doubling the percentage.
Right.
If that's the benchmark, we have to think about that. But I mean, 5 to 10 doesn't seem like a heroic increase in terms of the need. But.
Right, yeah. 8th grade, so this is that national test. I'm focusing on 8th grade math scale scores and looking at the achievement gap. So this is for Oregon, and these are just the NAEP scale scores. The Asian students the highest, the white, and then other groups of color well below this line, which is basically saying here, with these averages, and the large majority they're outside of that STEM possibility, because they're not getting to the point where the math and science skills are making them competitive to earn those degrees. And then one last chart here is another indicator. What share of our students are earning high advanced placement scores? The advanced placement test, which is administered by the College Board, either a 4 or 5. Those are sort of the scores that will earn you some college credit. And we went through and we sort of looked at all the kind of STEM-related topics, and you can see the green is the U.S. This is 14 per 1,000 18-year-olds, so the U.S., and then Washington, and then Oregon. And that sort of pattern of Oregon being lower than the U.S. and Washington persists in every one of those topics.
So how does that compare to the chart that you showed, Oregon being better than Washington?
I know. It's a little right.
I'm just trying to understand this.
Right. Well, a couple of things. One is, I think we might be doing a great job finding every one of these, a little bit better job finding some of these kids who have the talent and getting them into Oregon State. The other piece with this one is these aren't only Oregon High School. So if we're importing people from Idaho and other places, it's getting counted up.
Okay, that's helpful.
The other problem with the AP test is it costs money.
Yep.
So we have students that are taking the AP exam but not the test, or maybe only a couple of tests. So that's definitely a problem. There's students that have taken the classes and done well and don't test.
So this is the tip of the iceberg. I would say there's a tremendous amount, many questions in the data that underlie here that are, it's almost a Moneyball exercise of understanding where are things going better than you would expect given the kids that are moving through the system, and where are things going surprisingly underperforming given these.
John, in the past you had a slide that compared Oregon, this outcome, to national as well as the national needs. Was it national about 4% of kids making it through to STEM degrees?
Yeah, there is that, and
Yeah.
we're in. It's
We're
a little,
about half.
It is, yeah, it's a little bit higher on this.
Yeah, but this, and the national need was indicated around 8 or 10% needing to make it through. So you can see we're a deficit state.
Any good deficit country? I mean, in terms of the.
Well, it boils down to supply employers in Oregon. It means we have to go outside the state of Oregon to bring talent in. So we're kind of an education, like we run an education deficit, so we have to rely on other states, Washington, California, to get our graduates.
Great. Well, last time we talked about international, right? Because when businesses start looking at talent, if you can't find it in the state, then you look outside the state. If you can't find it inside the country, then you look outside the country. So how do our numbers compare internationally to where people are going? And can we actually make sure that we're looking at metrics that will make our students internationally competitive? Because, I mean, the battle for tech is global.
Right. Well, and I think that's why the goal is twofold in this charge. It is double the proficiency, but double the advanced as well. So in some respects, you have to think about: are you building a brewery, or are you building a small batch bourbon factory? I think you're building both.
Yeah.
Right.
On that chart, that 923 kids who got STEM degrees, you said you can break out the characteristics of the high schools that you made.
Yep.
And is that data we can see?
Yep.
So
I mean,
as a school board member, that's what I'm most interested in, is what kinds of populations are supporting the high schools and what kind of interaction between the populations and the schools.
Unequivocally. No, you get the characteristics of the history of third grade reading scores for each of the 923 kids that made it to that point.
So, Jim, I just wanted to build on your comment earlier that when you look at that number and you say, well, we're going to double that, that means bringing it to a level of mediocrity that within an international context is also far behind. And I think that the great challenge we have here is not to look at incremental solutions. We have to recognize that the depth of this problem is one that really is going to require us to think in a very much more creative and in some ways disruptive ways, because the challenge that we're facing is a significant one. So I think that our challenge, that we're really called to recognize that this truly is a Sputnik moment in a sense. And here in Oregon, we have an opportunity to think about it in that context.
No, John, you're out of time.
Gotta run it.
So I think this raises lots of questions on the data and stuff. I think this is just kind of getting our feet wet on this. I think this is something that as a council we're going to have to decide is what did we really want to understand around this, just so we understand where we stand, so we know where we're going. And I think Mark and I were even talking about the need, what is STEM? What qualifies as STEM and some definitional issues. But this kind of gets our feet wet a little bit. John, we may come back to you with some more questions.
All right.
But I know
Thank
you
you.
need to run, and so we'll let you go. But
Well, good luck.
so, again, I think there are more questions this generates, and so we will try to get that from you as we solicit your feedback as we go through the morning. So next on our agenda, I think we have Representative Chris Harker going to speak to us. I think Nancy said it well on his leadership down in Salem to make this all happen, and kind of get some of his words of wisdom as we take on this task against a pretty daunting challenge, I think.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hi, my name is Chris Harker. Thanks a lot for having me here. And thanks to all of you for stepping up and doing this. The task has been defined in vague terms here, honing in on it. I'm not going to give you any more data. Sandwiched in between Tanya and Duncan coming up, I knew that there would be an awful lot of data presented, all solid, all reliable. And I wanted to give you a little bit of the perspective of, from inside the Capitol, as somebody who was intimately involved with all of this, okay? And I've been referred to as one of the champions of this, and I certainly am a champion of STEM education, but I could not have helped us accomplish what we've done so far without the work of a whole lot of people who were in here doing this well before I was, in the trenches and at the upper levels too. Some of you are in this room and some are outside the room, but just as when I was in biomedical research, faculty member at OHSU, what I was able to accomplish was based on standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before me. Right? So we've set this up now. We've teed this up in the state of Oregon. We've got our chief education officer here, who is solidly on board. We've got the governor, who is solidly on board here. Some of us were at a luncheon yesterday where he spoke. Nancy, I know, was there, and several others, Duncan. And he is solidly behind this. This is part of his vision. And in fact, had he not stepped up and requested some of the funds that he did, some of the targeted investments that he did, we would have been left with a little bit of a hollow victory in passing this bill and creating this council. Because one thing that we were unable to do, despite the real strong bipartisan and from all parts of the state enthusiasm for this project, was come up with as much money as we wanted. Right? We did come up with some funds, and it's way more than the state has put into something like this and directed this way. So I feel very thankful to the governor for having done what he has done so far, for his ongoing commitment to this, and to his wisdom in getting Nancy into this position. Right? And just once more, I want to say thanks so much for stepping up. I introduced myself as a member of the state legislature. I have been doing that for 5 years, but before that, I sat in seats more similar to the ones that you have. I'm a medical researcher. I ran a software company for 20 years or so, and I'm a Sputnik kid, right? You know, first generation college guy, and just loved science. And I can't remember which ones of you said these things, but it was just, STEM was exciting, right? I mean, I had all the way through public schools, kindergarten through PhD, kids asking me, why do you do this? It's so hard. No, history, English, those things are hard for me, okay? Math, science, yeah, that's easy. That's where my brain goes. And a lot of you know that, and a lot of you know that not enough kids get the opportunity to realize that about science or about themselves, right? So a big part of what we're going to do at the early stages of education is help those kids realize that. And we're going to set the hook, and we're going to help pull them along. We're going to decrease the slope, the negative slope of that line. It's still here in front of me, although you're not seeing it. That one. I want to, you have in front of you or on your hard drives somewhere in RAM the report that came out of the STEM task force. But you probably haven't read it. And so I do want to refer you to a couple of things in there. And just not so much details, but the guiding principles behind what we did. Some of you were on that task force. Thanks for doing that. It helped us pull together in the interim before 2013, during legislative interim before the legislative 2013 session, we had a group of people who ranged from, in no particular order, university professors and high school students and masters of industry, all right? And some of you are here at the table, and we put together this report. There were forces at work sometimes that said we should be prescriptive. We want to spell out some things in this report real carefully. But there were also people at the table and testifying before the committee, who reminded us continuously that what we're looking at is a snapshot in time. We see our best forecast of where this field is going. We have the data that John and Duncan and others are presenting to us here in the room today, but that's going to change, all right? So we tried to build this body in a way that would let you adapt to changing circumstances. We tried to not be too prescriptive. There are guidelines in the task force report. There are specific metrics, but you have a lot of leeway. We tried to bring in people from outside the government, and we clearly succeeded in doing that. And we tried to put in some state money, and we did that. You now have the opportunity, I think, to take some of that money, take advantage of the enthusiasm in the private sector, the enthusiasm in the schools, and put together a few victories that are going to enable you to come back to us and get more money and more support for this, all right? I'm not going to talk for the full 15 minutes, I told you this, but I will happily answer some questions, but there's one other thing that I really want to point out that came up in the conversations. And it came up in part because of an editorial that appeared in the Oregonian by Congresswoman Bonamici and myself at the time. And it was about STEAM, all right? And right now I see the same smiles appear on people's faces that appeared at that time when somebody asked me, Representative Harker, what's this piece in the paper that just came out? And should we be talking about STEAM? Should we be talking about the role of the arts in what we're doing here? My response then went pretty much along these lines. I'm married to an artist. I hired artists at my software business because they were the folks who helped us put together good user interfaces. Our charge, legislative charge, was to deal with STEM. And so I was sticking to that conversation. But it's undeniable that arts education, in school, out of school, contributes tremendously to the ability of people to be problem solvers, to look at a particular situation and to think creatively. And I'm not just referring to the coincident, the parallel scores of math and music. All right, not just talking about that. I'm talking about people who have the ability to do some right brain, left brain conversation and come up with creative problem solving when it's needed. And frankly, as you folks all know, it's always needed in this particular area. So, in the very end of this this report from the task force is a mention of the arts and an incorporation of the arts into what you're going to be funding. And we were not talking about ceramic classes necessarily. We were not talking about taking an arts program and having that qualify as STEM. We were talking about integrated approaches to problem solving in the STEM disciplines, right? And I would, my wife did not put me up to this, but I would, she will ask if I said anything bad. But I would encourage you, as you go through your tasks here, to keep that in mind, all right? Not for my wife's sake, nor mine, but because of, because it works really well. And I think Congresswoman Bonamici has gone on to continue to pound that drum at the federal level now. And I think the more that we can help out here at the state level, the better. Okay?
Just a comment?
Yeah, comment away.
Because, well, interesting you brought up arts because that's also closely tied to culture, you know, especially any Native American culture, and that's what I think is important to get. STEM is that there's a cultural shift that has to occur within the Native American communities towards STEM. And maybe arts can help with that too.
I think that that's probably
There's
true.
a close tie there.
Yeah. I think that that's probably true. I also think that there are examples of programs around the state who are doing a good job integrating, and some of them were spoken about here a little bit. The Sisters School District actually is doing a pretty fine job of integrating arts and sciences together, and I happen to know that because I've gotten involved with some of the people over there. And there are certainly other examples of that around the state. I don't see a clock in this room.
It's 9 o'clock, so you're right on time.
All right. One last thing. I am going to, I stepped up to do this job as public service because I saw the same problems that you folks see. And I had the opportunity to go serve in the legislature for a while. And I've been there for 5 years now, and I'm going to finish out next year, and then I'm going to be done. There are other people in the legislature right now who are going to carry this message forward. We have succeeded in raising higher ed to a level of perceived importance in the legislature that it didn't have before. We have succeeded in raising STEM education and technology to a level where they were not really appreciated prior to that. And I think time is right for you folks to carry this ball forward and make some more good progress. All right? Thanks so much.
Questions from the council?
Questions, comments?
From the council? Maybe just a question for me. 2015 will be the next big legislative session, and obviously there'll be competition for dollars for all kinds of programs, and this is one that will obviously be out there. Is there something you would help us think about to prepare ourselves for that session so we can make the best case for funding in 2015 to really move this down the road? Because we can have great ideas, but ultimately we're going to have to fund something to make it happen. We use existing funds to some extent, but also new funds is helpful.
Absolutely. There are some other monies in the state legislative purse that can be shifted around some over time. There are conversations going on about that. In terms of what can happen here, I think some of those, you had the metrics, and there was discussion of that with John's data up here. Some of the numbers were higher than anticipated, made us look pretty good. Some were pretty low, and we talked about doubling those. What was it, 2% going up to 4 or 5%? Doesn't matter much. Feel free to blow them out of the water. All right? Nothing breeds success like success. Right? Other? Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thanks for including me.
Appreciate it. Appreciate your support for this. Okay, next on the agenda, we have the STEM Employers Coalition to give us an update of kind of progress they're making and those efforts. And Duncan, I think you're right.
Thank you. We've got Kyle Ritchie-Knoll, who's actually been the coordinator of the STEM Coalition, and we're a little reluctant. We've got our co-chair here and our spark plug, Aubrey, if you wanted the truth to be known. It was her idea in the first place to get this going. So I do want to talk about the STEM Coalition, but actually I'm Duncan Wise, President of the Oregon Business Council, and I'd like to talk more broadly about what we might be able to do as a partner with this council as we move forward. We got some presentation, but I'll just talk until we get set up. From my perspective at OBC, we work on education in a lot of different vantage points. We have been the home for the STEM Employer Coalition, which Jill Island, along with Eric, co-chaired, and we brought a very large coalition together to help support the legislation, and before that, to really help define and refine the goals that you now have in front of you. And also at OBC, we have the Oregon Business Plan, which is the statewide economic strategy, which we built STEM very much firmly into, and we'll come back to that in a bit. And we also have a new organization called Oregon Learns, which is intended to be a place to support all the work that the governor, Nancy, and the team are doing, providing communications and technical assistance. And that's an arm that I think we're going to be able to be helpful to you in your work so as you go forward. So I would just open this by saying our mission is to make you wildly successful in your endeavor. That's what we want to do. So anything we can do to help you in this council, we're eager to do, and we'll talk more about that. So but let's a little bit of the history on the STEM Employer Coalition. We came together, I lose track of time, but in a couple of meetings, and again, Aubrey was the spark plug for both, where we brought employers together, brought Eric in as the chair of ETIC, to really talk about extending the great work that ETIC has done in increasing engineering education in Oregon. We should remember that. But to see how do we extend that into the larger continuum of education, understanding that what Nancy is leading is really blurring the lines between K-12, community college, higher ed. We're really designing a whole new system that needs to integrate, and that's really where the whole STEM coalition idea came from. What's, I think, pretty unusual about your work, as we look around the country, is you're focusing on the whole system. Most places are working on K-12, or they're working on engineering. You've got the challenge of how do you move the whole system into the 21st century? That's a huge responsibility, as you mentioned, probably a disruptive opportunity to change things. So that, I think, is the challenge. The goal that of the STEM Coalition was the product of a workshop that we had, a facilitated workshop by a fellow named Peter Hutchinson from Public Strategies Group. Again, Eric was there, Aubrey, others. And there was a long discussion of this goal, but I want to your point in your questions of John, this was a one-day session, and I would encourage you to challenge and think really deeply about these goals, despite the fact that we've been advocating them. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Eric and Aubrey.
It was 4 hours.
4 hours. and from my point of view, this kind of goal setting is important, and just like the 40-40-20 goal. Is it 40-40-20 or 39-38? I don't know. The key idea here is this is a goal ambitious enough to be impossible to achieve without what you described, disruptive change. You can't do this through a grant program. You can only do this by thinking deeply about the delivery of education and thinking about what changes you need to make to get these ambitious goals. So I think you need to refine the goals, but they're sufficiently ambitious enough that I think you're going to have to think about the whole system to be successful. When Nancy and I talked about this council, and I think you will agree, the real opportunity for you is to basically be the pioneers of the whole systems change that we're talking about for the whole education system. So when you think about the resources you have, when you think about what you're doing, I would encourage you to think not about $8 million or $16 or $32 million in the STEM investment. I would be thinking more like $14 billion, because that's about how much we invest in the entire education enterprise. When you add property tax, it's probably more than that per biennium. And how are those dollars being used to achieve the goals? Because I think if you're not thinking about that, there's no way on earth you're going to achieve these goals. So that would be my encouragement. Now, what would it happen if you achieve these goals? Again, we try to connect this with the economy. This is ECHO's work. We would have, with these goals alone, a 6% increase in per capita income. That would move us well on our way to meeting our state goal of being above the national average. It would add $9 billion in increased income for Oregonians, and it would and generate about $1.4 billion to public revenues per biennium. So this is a big deal. If you achieve this, this is going to put us on a path to greater prosperity in our individual lives, as well as into savings in additional revenues for schools and higher ed and everything else. So we see this as part of what we call the virtuous circle of where investments in education lead to stronger economy, which means more investments in education and get us going on the right path. So not to put a stress on you, but what you're doing is a really big deal. Now, we mentioned the need for redesign, and can we pull up Ellie here? Oregon Learns, we've tried to summarize in two and a half minutes, actually 2 minutes, 15 seconds, what Nancy's doing. And we've tried, and it's kind of fun. We'll see what you think. But what we want to stress is we're talking about a different system here, and let's see if we can capture this. Always an adventure. And, well, yeah, the laptop may not work. Here we go. Just have to ask questions. Oh, we don't have any volume. don't think it's going to work.
Is this the only volume you have in the room, just from the laptop?
Yeah. I don't think it's going to work.
Try it.
Sorry, guys. We have a...
Children like elementary, middle, high school.
No, you can't hear the team.
Pretty normal, right? Well, the thing is, that system isn't working for enough of our kids and for us as a state. A third of our kids drop out of high school, and we're lucky if half of those who go on make it through college. Those numbers are even higher for poor and minority children. Why does this happen? All of our students are capable of success. We have dedicated, talented educators. The main problem is the way our system is designed. It's a factory model that moves kids along in batches, where too many fall behind and drop out. That may have worked 50 years ago, when low-skilled jobs paid a good wage. That isn't the case anymore. There has to be a better way. Let's ask Ellie.
Wow, we're all different. We have different dreams. We learn differently too. Maybe school should be like a GPS. We know where we want to go. With some help and navigation and someone to believe in us, we can chart our own path. Let us learn at our own pace and show you at every step that we're ready for the next. We can learn in a lot of ways too. Online, in the community, in projects, in problem solving, and working with our classmates. This way the learning is really ours, and our best teachers inspire us, guide us, and work beside us. We like this way better, and so do our teachers. It lets us go as fast and as far as we want.
Thanks, Ellie. It's up to all of us to give Ellie this kind of learning experience. First, we have to believe she and all of her classmates can succeed. Next, our teachers need more time, support, and freedom to collaborate so they can nurture such learning and grow as well. Then we have to rethink and redesign our entire education system to make it happen. That's what the governor, our legislature, and our educators have set in motion. We call it student-centered teaching and learning. All of us can play a part. Let's give Ellie, her classmates, and all of Oregon a much brighter future. To see how and how you can help, go to OregonLearns.org.
Well, I hope you could, sorry about that, Vaughn, could you hear it? So, again, the key idea here, and is really to think differently about the delivery of education. And again, I think that Nancy would agree that's what her job is in general. But again, you could be the leaders in doing this. I don't think you can achieve what you want to achieve without rethinking the basic structure of delivery. And once you've done that, you'll need to think through a lot of the systems and funding streams and how and professional development opportunities to make all this work. So again, one of the challenges I think you have as you enter this into this conversation is how you might learn about what the different strategies are and how you can really broaden your thinking, not only about what are the right goals, but what are the delivery tools, what are the different strategies we need to think about to achieve that. And again, we are more than eager to help you from our Oregon Learns vantage point. John DePonte, is one of our team members. We have a lot of resource we can help bring. You just let us know, and we'll see what we can do to help you on redesign. One of our partners is in the room, Bev Stein. She's worked at Public Strategies now on her own in Oregon. If you don't know Bev, she's an incredible treasure in helping think through creatively redesigning systems. And we have a lot of very good systems thinkers who are helping us. And again, we're eager to help you as you want. This chart simply summarizes. You can go to our website and learn a lot more about education redesign. But this just, again, talks about the kind of changes we envision needing to be made in 21st century education to match the economy that we're dealing. It's a very different process, and again, Nancy is brilliant at this, so I can go through this, but talking about different models of schools and learning and how we move forward. I would encourage the council to really spend some time thinking deeply about the future of education in the context of science. What you were talking about, that motivation of students through real work that is meaningful and in context, I think is the key to driving dramatic improvement in education. So as you think about your work, you've got a lot of strategic considerations. We just threw out a few to help whet your appetite. How do you increase student motivation? You've already talked about where are the best targeted outcomes. How do we create seamless learner-centered systems? We know that the pathways across K-12, community college, higher ed are clunky from a student perspective in math and science. There are real problems of mismatch in standards. How do we support educators? That's key. And And how are we going to describe and measure this? Again, you've already started into those questions. We've got some decent data, but we need a lot better data. John can help, but again, what Nancy's doing in her research we have a huge opportunity to get better on data. And of course, equity is just critical here. We need to measure and think of strategies to all the populations across the state. I'm going to turn over to Kyle. Upcoming events, again, the STEM Coalition. We're the coalition itself is, I think, still a very, very eager group of folks. We're right now thinking what role the coalition should play in relation to the council. This is the great moment from the council's point of view to have you here. So again, I think the council and Eric here would be eager to learn what you would need from the larger business community. We have a couple other opportunities, and Kyle, why don't you speak to those?
Yeah, I think I'll describe a couple of ways that the STEM Employer Coalition can work with the group. And also, I think that, as Duncan said, we're eager to do that. We're eager to support in whatever way would be helpful. One of the first opportunities is the Oregon Leadership Summit on December 9th. And we have a flyer that you should have in your packet, but this will be the 11th annual Leadership Summit. If you don't know, it's an annual gathering of industry, education, government, economic development folks in the state who come together to really consider how to create an annual plan for Oregon that will, really look at raising our economic health, creating jobs, reducing poverty. Those are goals that we take very seriously and are in all of our best interests. So one of the things that we'll be doing this year is really focusing in on this opportunity to engage all of those stakeholders in helping to understand and shape the work that we're doing in education, redesign, and transformation. So the morning part of the agenda, we're going to focus in on Oregon's industries. And we'll have a number of industry leaders will be there and really talk about where the industries are going. We're trying to tell a little different side of the story so that people can understand the really exciting work that's being done here. So create some of those opportunities for people to say, oh, I didn't know that. And then through these stories that our executives will tell, really help people understand where the industries are going and what the needs are. And it's probably no surprise to any of you that one of the common threads in every one of these stories is the need for talent. So to that end, we'll spend the afternoon really getting deeply into the education work. So we'll start with Nancy and other leaders in the state sort of setting the stage, creating the vision for where we're headed. And then we'll break into 3 concurrent breakout sessions, one looking at higher education, one focused on STEM and CTE, and the other on workforce. And so this is really an opportunity, in particular the STEM and CTE is an opportunity for us to help provide whatever feedback would be useful to all of you. So I'll sort of give you a challenge in the sense of think about what you'd like to know from this group of stakeholders who will be in the room. And I expect that there'll be a lot who will be interested. We did STEM breakout sessions last year, and they were very well attended. So as we'll have an opportunity, and Bev Stein will be there and to really help us facilitate this in a very formal way. So it's an opportunity to ask the questions that would be helpful to you from this group of stakeholders in the room. Looking at how do we meet these ambitious goals? How can the employer community partner in ways that we haven't thought of? How do we disrupt the status quo and really get at these goals? So, I'll give you that challenge. We're working on some of those questions, but I'll circle back with Mark and Nancy as well. We want this to be an opportunity to get input that will be helpful to Nancy and her team as well as those of you around this table.
Jim will be leading that panel, so of course you are all not only welcome, you're more than welcome to be there. We'd love to have you on December 9th if you possibly can to be part of this conversation. And Eric and Jill Island will give a little more on the STEM Coalition, and I think it'll be a really great session.
Yes, when you think about the challenges of redesign, that is a big challenge. We talked about that. And also the patience to go through this for multiple years. You just don't do this 1 year and you're done. This is changing. So have you thought all kind of how this, and we're going to try some things, obviously, we're going to come up with some ideas, but it's going to take some time to figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how you change an education system that's really I won't say fragmented, but every school district has their own path that they want to lead. Have you thought at all about kind of how this kind of gets traction, if you will, in terms of redesign? Is it kind of finding a couple programs to try this out on and see if they can, but it's going to take time? Or have you really thought about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's partly for us to figure out, and I think it's a combination of models always work, but we're really responsible for scaling up. So there could be some legislative solutions, there could be some policy solutions. Definitely we do need models because I think a lot of people can't see things. And I think what we find when we go around, what our biggest challenge is, I'll give you an example. A proficiency bill passed, and now what a lot of teachers are trying to do is fit it in the traditional classroom. So proficiency is really about what do you know and are able to do, and how do you get every kid there. But then sometimes we hear people I just heard recently an example of a teacher saying, well, I'm going to give a test, you either pass it or you don't pass it, and then, so because people are really trying to take all these innovations and fit them into the way they've been doing the work for years, and there's so many partners who have really worked on this work, like OBC and Oregon Business Association, and so many others who have been looking at proficiency. So, you know, I think as much, that's why I said earlier, as much as we do the STEM work, it's the bigger work that we need to do about really what should school look like. And, you know, Duncan knows that when I was in Springfield, we created a school called the Academy of Arts and Academics, and now they also have a health and science branch. And they would do things like, when they did physics, they created a circus of physics. I mean, an actual circus that community came to, and these kids. But they demonstrated around physics, but it's almost like you need schools that are so much more project-based. And that is a heavy, heavy lift. And that's why I said before, I mean, I do feel in the sciences and the math integrated in the sciences and technology, there's more of a tendency for people in those fields to do more hands-on sort of project-based instruction. So we're going to just have to keep working with all of the partners around, and I'm talking about people like OEA and COAST and all the people who are talking about overall delivery of instruction. So I'm just hoping as we create this, we not only say what's it going to look like in these 4 disciplines, but how does it recreate all of schools. It's still a very heavy lift, I think, to do that.
And I really, again, Jim, I would say why we're so excited about you is this is the group who has the talent to think about the question you're asking. We do have this new organization called Oregon Learns. You can go to the website, and we're bringing an incredible group of volunteers together to help support people like you to think through exactly what we're talking about. How do you make transformational change in these systems? And it's got to be local examples that we lift up, but find ways, as Nancy calls it, bust barriers, whether they're funding barriers or regulatory barriers that allow the kind of innovation you were describing, Thompson, to happen on a broader scale and becomes regular. And we don't, I mean, that's what is so exciting about this. We frankly don't know how to do this on the scale we're talking about. We're all going to have to learn together. But I would tell you, in closing, we have absolutely, and I've been around education in Oregon for a long time, this is by far the best team we have ever had, both in Nancy and her team and all the teams, both at OAFB, but also in K-12 and with the new HEC staff. With you all, we are incredibly well positioned to do this work. And again, if you go out into the field and go out into the schools, there is amazing work happening both in schools and in the nonprofit sector that are coming together in just an extraordinary way. So the challenge is figuring out how to learn about that and then reinforce it. And I think that's the opportunity you have. One other final closing. We talk about meeting goals, and I just can't help but, because Eric and I were talking at the beginning, he was the chair of ETIC. Let's remember that in the 90s, we set a goal in engineering, and Oregon is one of the few states, I believe, and Bruce, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce has been the leader, now Laura, but we've actually increased the engineering output in Oregon with a deliberate business council, like yours, through ETIC, working with education to actually drive the numbers up. And I see there's Laura there, sorry, I thought you were here. And so we actually have done this, and you're doing it on a rather larger scale. But it's the combination of investment and collaboration and redesign that got us there, I think. And so we'd encourage you to think boldly, and again, from the point of view of Oregon Learns, we are more than eager to help you in any way you would ask us to.
Jim, I think another thing, the fourth thing that Oregon Education Investment Board is supposed to do is invest in outcomes. Highly political. But, I think it would do us well to take time to really think about these things. But one example would be, if at some point what you say is we're going to give schools or districts who really shift the way this education works, so it's more project-based, we're going to budget a little more towards them, or budget to outcomes. Because if we can really define what school needs to look like and define the outcomes, then, we could incent it on a much bigger way. It's going to take huge conversations about that before we do that. So I think it's like, how do you incent things, and how's the ability to budget to outcomes really support us?
I would just kind of piggyback a little bit on what you were saying, Duncan, that when we talk at this level, we recognize that this really is a significant task that we're taking upon ourselves, because at the core, this is not an organizational issue. It's not just a process issue. It's really a cultural issue. And that we, coming out of an industrial society, have been very good at siloing each of our organizations and each of our institutions. And education itself has served as a silo of a process that acted fairly independent. And that, as a result, when we get into the industry, as industry people coming into the educational institutions, people don't understand us. They look at us as if we're from Mars. Because our world, our dynamic, our culture, particularly coming out of the software industry, which has been the most disruptive industry, but insofar as it's been disruptive, it's also been empowering transformational change in every single industry, from farming to medicine to all of our semiconductors. But if you look at this, that we need to recognize that we really, that as this is a cultural issue, that we have to rethink the resources that we're bringing into this discussion. This is not just how does education fix itself, but how do we as a society rethink ourselves? So how do we get our community to stand up and say, these are our children. Our schools are our longhouses. This is where we teach them. Because one of the greatest challenges I've seen coming into this is the lack of mentors. We throw these kids, particularly when they get to high school, they have 180 kids for the teachers. The teachers no longer are able to mentor the kids. But when you see examples of success, for instance, what Don Domes has done in Hillsborough, by inviting the industry, of inviting mentors in to work with the kids, it's not just that there's robotics, but there's a relationship of trust and a relationship of guidance that happens. And so I think that we have to recognize that the call here is when is really an aspirational call that really is all of us coming together to say, this is all of our responsibility. How do we do this as a community? Not just, how do you, Nancy, fix this? You can't fix this. But you can call us to aspire to come together as a community. And that's what I think, why this group that we have here, we all come to the table with that desire to be a part of the solution, because it is going to be much larger than this table. Because I find that as you bring forth this conversation, for instance, we're meeting with Puppet Labs, one of our most dynamic software companies in the region here, and we're going to be bringing together their leadership of Puppet Lab to say, how can we as Puppet Lab and how can we be a part of this conversation? How can we mentor? How can we do meet and greets? And we have these resources and the assets that if we begin to call forth a larger aspirational vision, will align us. So we're not just talking about the dollars that are allocated by the state legislature, but we're talking about all of our resources, human and financial resources of our community.
Great.
Beautifully
Can I
said.
add
Challenge is
Right on.
Can I add one thing to
comment
that?
before you move on?
Right, and Thompson, I totally agree with what you're saying. This is really transformational, and it's really breaking down the barriers between education and the rest of the community. You know, at the end of the day, we look at, in many cases, education is that thing someone does over there, unless you have your kids in which case you really care about what's going on with your kids. But, you know, from a social perspective, this is probably the most important thing that we do. And how do we actually enroll everybody in participating, creating our future? And one of the things that I've always talked about, and Thompson knows this is true, is like we actually exclude our kids in that conversation in many cases. They have a lot to say about that. So when you bring the mentors in, you bring the community in, and engage everybody in this conversation, the opportunities for what we can do is huge. And I think that that's one of the things that brings me to this meeting and looks at the possibility of what we can do and put the measures in place to ensure that we're actually moving forward. And one last thing, and I look at this from an entrepreneurial perspective and an innovation perspective. We're going to try and we're going to fail at some of this stuff, and we get that. And from a legislative perspective, how do we recognize that the failure doesn't mean we're done? That means we just actually learn something and move on. Because at the end of the day, it's our future and our kids' future that's at stake. So let's get this done.
Yeah, this is Jessica. I wanted to say that I'm so glad that we're having this type of conversation because it is, it's so important. One of the things that, you look back on, from my childhood especially is, you think of those sort of key people that made a huge impact on sort of your life path and sort of influenced you. I think, having that mentor involvement and that industry involvement, you just, you never know which kid you're going to inspire and what that person is going to grow up to do. And the more that we involve ourselves in that process and sort of the more involved that we are as a community, as industry leaders, in that cultural building activity and the inspiring, kids to think outside, their normal school week. And I think, that is going to be probably one of the most powerful schools that we're able to build.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. You've put the gauntlet in front of us now. And,
Thanks.
obviously, we're going to have much more conversation on this because this is really, again, this is just kind of level setting and understanding where we are. So that was very helpful.
Thanks.
We're going to, next agenda item is Jamie. Just gives us a sense of where the money is kind of going today. And then we're going to move quick to the other agenda items so we can get to, I really do want to address the advisory group. We may just pass through the charter real quickly, but...
I couldn't hear, sorry.
Yeah, you're up. Yeah, you're up.
So is the slides up there? So I'm not used to speaking in front of a group like this. My normal group is a class of 40 middle school students. So apologize if I have a little bit different energy level perhaps than what you are maybe used to. So I'm new to Oregon Department of Education. I've only been there 2 months now, so I still am trying to figure out how things work and where to put my lunch, as a matter of fact. So. One of the things that I'm really excited about today is the partnerships that we're talking about, because as a classroom teacher, had I known that I had all of you kind of in my back pocket, it might have looked a little bit different as to who I could kind of reach out and speak to. So it's just an honor really to be here today and knowing that we are all going after the same goals. So Duncan talked about some funding that we can do maybe locally, but there are some opportunities right now through ODE to help kind of perpetuate some of the things that we're working on. The first one is what's called the Regional STEM Hub Grant, and that is due out in November. And with this, what we're trying to do is create some of these partnerships in a more formalized manner. A lot of people maybe are working in what we've talked about as silos, so trying to bring those silos together. And the emphasis is really to connect business and industry and STEM community partners with the more formal and informal education between either school districts or the student-focused nonprofits. And then as well as the post-secondary institutions. Sorry, I even have to take notes here. So new at this. So, and part of that is just creating that framework where we can start to look at what are some of the needs of the community and what are some of the outcomes. And we talk about outcomes and how we can reach those through that partnership. The the next one is STEAM. Oh, go ahead.
Before we go on, I just want to say another word about that through the House Bill 3232 funds. Two things, really. In terms of the STEM Council, there were some funds that were, there was a STEM investment grant program that was legislated as part of the STEM Investment Council. These are not those funds. Okay, these are separate funds that were provided by the legislature to specifically connect to the world of work. And yet, what you'll see here is directly tied to the recommendations from the STEM task force, as well as the underpinnings of the legislation in 2636 that established the council. So I just want to be clear on that. Another aspect of these regional STEM hubs was really the idea that there's partnerships going on already across the state. How do we incent those to do more outcome-based work to help support those partnerships that are under development, and also how do we connect them in a statewide collaboration across those networks to share expertise, capacity, and best practices to lift all of these regional conversations. So I just wanted to say that.
Mark, is that a role that you see like Oregon Department of Ed playing, the overseer of 3 to 5 regional hubs to keep everybody connected at a level that's statewide?
I think that is
Or is
right.
that an additional hub that needs to be created?
I think the coordination of those various STEM, regional STEM efforts is going to lie with some shared responsibility between the OEIB and the ODE, really, in terms of overseeing that work, and certainly ties into the work of the STEM Council as well. So it's one of those great assets that we have to recognize that is out there already, is this kind of implementation network of energy and activity already underway. So we have to make sure that we're integrating into that work that's already underway.
I was just saying, but to follow up from what Aubrey was just saying, how do we make sure that it is working? What is the metrics that we're using to define that success? And who is responsible at the end of the day to do that type of evaluation? Because this is, as Dwayne was mentioning, this is a learning process. There is going to be the ability to, so in a learning process you evaluate, you then redo, right?
Yeah.
And so that there has to be this and this is where, again, the learning, it's a cultural issue. That not one of these things, we know there's no fix here. There's no silver bullet. But how do we create that learning dynamic to allow us to evolve quickly? And so who's responsible then for analyzing and centralizing that learning and has that responsibility there?
Yeah, I think as Nancy often says publicly, that the OEIB is really about the what and the why. So we have to be very, very clear on the outcomes that we're seeking from this, and the STEM Council can certainly help. I think put some stakes in the ground around that, both the quantitative measures that can exist to demonstrate that we're on our pathway to success, but also putting out there some of the qualitative aspects that I've heard spoken about here in the room too. How do we inspire and motivate interest? How do we measure interest in STEM education? How are we? Is it possible to quantify the pedagogical approaches that teachers are taking? I'm not quite sure that that's in that, but we can put forward a vision, and I know that vision is shared already with the STEM hubs that I've spoken with. So that iteration, one of the initial discussions across those STEM hubs will be looking at what are some of the common measures and outcomes that should be in place, and what do those data tell us, and what do those data not tell us about the health of the activities. So that's a long conversation too.
Well, I'd like to ask one question around that, and it's a cultural question, okay, and it's a cadence question. Okay, so when we're involved in this whole entrepreneurial exercise that we're doing, we're going to learn things as we go. But we also have legislation that actually gets passed, which doesn't change very quickly. So when you say, from a legislative perspective, these are the measures that we're using, and I have to say that at least my feeling about the system we have is it doesn't adapt very quickly either, and it punishes people for failure in a way that is not very helpful for the type of work that we're doing. How do we give people the coverage to actually try things out and adapt accordingly at the same time where we're creating the measures that Thompson says are really important, and knowing that they're dynamic? You know, so and again, who's responsible for that? Is that us? Is that you guys? Is it someone at the state level? Is it all fall on Nancy's desk?
Nancy, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, and you know, I think it's the other piece of the work we do is what's called a tight, loose, I say tight, loose, tight system. And the tight is tight on outcomes, tight on standards and outcomes that we measure based on those standards, loose on how it gets implemented out there. So, because it might look different places, but as long as we reach the outcomes. But as we measure, if we see that in certain places they're not getting to the outcomes, then it does mean that we're more responsible to come in and work very closely with those people not getting the outcomes. I honestly believe it's the OEIB who has bottom line responsibility around this, because we have bottom line responsibilities about the outcomes and making sure we achieve the outcomes and investing. So, you know, I want us to accept that responsibility. Now, you know, the way we're working internally is we have what we're calling kind of a birth to career and college group. Within that group is the head of early learning, the head of K-12, the head of community colleges, you know, the head of four-year colleges, and we meet on a very regular basis to talk about the system. So, you know, so I think we're going to accept the accountability. Generally, when the implementation happens, it goes over to ODE, but not the accountability. We own that.
And I think ODE and OEIB have been working pretty closely together. So.
When you think about the size of this program, it's relatively small, probably compared to the demand. Have you guys thought about how you're going to pick and choose? I mean, it's really going to be challenging because there are going to be targets at all different areas and kind of age groups and populations. So.
And that's something that Mark and I have had extensive conversations, and we'll have it again tomorrow.
Especially given this discussion around redesign versus just incremental. We can do one more program, or we can change the system and kind of move upstream. And that's really it's something for us to watch and learn from as you do this. So.
So some of the other funding that is available are the STEM, CTE, and STEAM programs and activities. And this is really focused on the underserved and underrepresented populations. So some of the data that you saw out there. It's for both formal and informal education. We realize how in school is very important, but also what can be fostered out of school can support each other in that. And so that's what this one is specifically focused on, trying not to limit who is getting the funding for this. So it's going broad views from post-secondary, non-for-profits, and school districts. And then the last one is kind of talking about those best practice schools, using them as exemplars to use as models for other schools, what's working and how we can actually get STEM education and the best practices, and then use it as a training ground for other educators to kind of come through and have some professional learning or professional development opportunities with that. There are quite a few schools that call themselves STEAM and STEM and different, and there's not necessarily one consecutive. If you go to one school, they're doing some really great things. You go to a different school, but trying to figure out what those best practices are and then trying to bring them to one spot so we can all kind of see what a model school would look like.
Go back to us just for a second. So are there schools that have been tagged already this way, or is it something they would call lab schools?
We haven't, ODE hasn't necessarily.
So it's any school that's willing to put this together in a context.
Right.
Any other questions for the council?
And I will say that, so some people may be confused too, so CTE, Career Technical Education, has grants out right now. I think that's $8 million. They're reviewing those grants. I think some of you in the room maybe have some grants in with that. ODE is reviewing them this week. Of that $8 million, $1 million is focused specifically on STEM programming. So I think there was some confusion earlier.
Yeah, a question I'm trying to understand the process for the RFP coming out. How is that introduced to the schools, or how does it get connected?
So hopefully, I'm working on getting the listserv together right now, trying to attach this information on the listservs that are already out there. A lot of people have been contacting me, so keeping track of that. We're also doing a webinar once this is released. So I think we'll do 3 webinars that come out.
So the various principals of all of our schools in the state are aware that this opportunity is there, or is that?
It'll go out on those listservs.
I think what's really critically important here is the criteria for who gets these awards. Because, for example, when Thompson's talking about, you know, if part of the criteria is like you have to partner with other people, like other industries, depending on what we put in that criteria makes it different. Or Jim's question, if you say you have to have a proven track record, that gears you more towards the people who have already started doing it. So this criteria is critical, and we need to make sure the criteria moves us to where we want to go.
Has the criteria been developed since you're already doing RFPs?
The OARs have been out.
The criteria for how people apply for the grants, I think she's...
Not the specifics.
Yeah, so that's where the opportunity lies, I think.
So this is something we'll probably want you to come back as you get these RFPs decided, so we can kind of see, because these are the experiments you're talking about, and we'd like to see how broad those experiments are, I guess, to learn. So RFP out in January here, when would it actually be granted then?
Hopefully in February.
So likely for the following school year, or is it something that would happen immediately, or just?
Hopefully the funding could go out immediately, but the chunk of it would be for the following year.
It's just for the biennium.
Yeah. They're both coming out the end of November.
Indirectly, one of the things this slide I think also talks to is the definition of STEM, because you also see now CTE there. And you know, we have CTE teacher here in the room that will talk about the fact that this is not the career technical education of our youth. This is not wood shop and metal shop anymore. This is very close and dear to our heart. So this is about this definition of how far are we going, what are we going to include, how does it link? Because as you can see, it's already been linked, and we're gaining letters. It's not only is there an A in there, there's now a C and a T and an E, and we really need to define what our goals are.
Okay. Any other questions?
So if anything else comes up, feel free to send me.
More to hear on this one. It's going to be interesting. Okay, everyone okay? Can we keep going, or let's keep going? If you have to take a break, just kind of the restrooms are down the hall, and help yourself and keep going. So the next item on the agenda, which is pretty important in terms of kind of the mission of this group, or the charter of this group. Mark took the liberty to draft the charter to try to identify what we're supposed to be about. And maybe Mark can kind of take us through it generally what it is. We're not going to ask for approval for this today, but I think we would like to get the council to kind of give it a thumbs up. So we'll gain feedback today. We'll give you a couple weeks if you want to respond. I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to comment on it. Then hopefully we would be ready to approve this at our next council meeting as the charter. So I do think it's important for us to be able to define what we're supposed to be responsible for, and it be clear, and that we can make sure we design our work plans to be consistent with that charter. So Mark, you want to just kind of generally take us to the charter?
Yeah, just in general, what I tried to do is really base this off of the legislation as the first, primary point of information to develop this. There's some pieces that are specific to the legislation about our charge and the purpose of the council. In addition to that, we have to be mindful that it's integrating into the overarching OEIB responsibilities in terms of driving policy and investments. Okay, so the council is really established for the purpose of assisting the Chief Education Officer in looking at a long-term strategy around improving outcomes in STEM education and in general in STEM from that birth to career. And so when we're looking at this, we're looking at a system that's not just the formal education system. We're also needing to coordinate with our economic development, our workforce development folks, our early learning, our youth development, our out-of-school providers, all of that really is that educational ecosystem that I think is within the purview of the council's charge to actually make sure that we're considering all of those various aspects there. The two goals are in the legislation. I think in our next, as we talk about our next meetings, we do need to be mindful of those. There might be some additional outcomes that we would want to make sure that we are also putting into place and to unpack those a little bit, because not all STEM degrees are created equal necessarily. As John showed earlier, we don't need to produce more environmental science graduates necessarily. It's an important field, absolutely, but in terms of the pure supply and demand, we have to be mindful of that. The specific responsibilities are noted there within the council. I've added a few in terms of making sure that we're defining our annual goals, our interim outcomes that we're going to be focusing on, as well as making some references to this STEM investment grant program. Again, it was not funded in this last biennium, but it still has been established through that legislation, and so provides us an opportunity to be looking at that public-private funding for both looking at the models, but more importantly, how do we drive systemic change there. So looking forward to some of that feedback. With the suggested focuses or foci of the council, and that's always does foci work? Yes, I do. I'm thinking of optics, and so it's also multiple focal points here. Certainly, identification of our systemic barriers, as well as the assets and programs and models and research that actually works. That needs to be one of our first charges, is to really get a better understanding of the data that we have and identify those systemic barriers within that larger ecosystem. And I think that as we move to later talking about that advisory group there, will be extraordinarily helpful to us in that process. Let's see, I think we've already mentioned the selection of the interim metrics to monitor progress. We need to be mindful of that, and then the broader partnerships. So I don't necessarily want to go through each and every one of these. We do need to put into place some of the procedural bits about meetings, about eventually in here within the charter, we also need to develop rules and procedures. How long do we all serve? We serve certainly at the pleasure of the chief education officer. All of us do that, and so but we do need to put into place some term limits. I think it was not established by the legislation, and so I think the default is no more than 4 years, just to give you an idea of that. But that's a conversation that I think we should tee up for our next council meeting.
Any comments on this? I think it's a good start.
No, I would argue that from my experience around ETIC and other, when you're created by legislation, the real power is in the ground rules that we set. We have a tremendous amount of flexibility, I think, to shape what this organization is going to be, not only today, but what we believe it's going to be in the future. And so this is an important work, good step, but this is a big opportunity for us.
The challenge would be to structure our meetings so we get the right content to address the questions that you've all just addressed around the table. Okay.
Just one more thing on there. The legislation has some very interesting, if you actually looked at it, it looks like it's been repeated 3 times in that, and that's really due to the fact that right now the OEIB is due to sunset in 2016. And so should that happen, the oversight of this investment council falls to a combination of the superintendent of public instruction, the commissioner for community and college services, and the chancellor of the university system as a current legislation.
And just one final point, maybe on this last page around the investment grant program, as Mark mentioned, we do not have funding for any of this work right now going forward. Obviously, we're working on our own here, so we're not getting paid, but in terms of moving some of the things we want to move forward, we're probably going to have to be advocates for that in the next biennium to say, we've laid out a strategy, we need to do some things, we need to have the dollars to create the incentive to drive some changes, and we're going to have to advocate for that. But we're going to have to be able to build that roadmap and path so the legislature feels confidence it's a good investment for the state to do that. So thinking about kind of what our charter is over the next 2 years is building the case and having clear strategies so that we can go to the legislature and say, we think this will make a difference. And to Dwayne's point, we have to make it clear, some of these things will work, some may not work, but we got to try. And also, I think the other thing we have to be clear about, it's going to take time. If people expect that once an overnight fix on this, it is not going to happen. This is going to take continual investment and change in the system in terms of how we get that. So I think we have to be careful not to, people say, well, it's going to make a big difference. It's going to take some time. We have to set expectations. You got to keep putting pressure on this. We got to move the system, but it's going to take time. We've got a lot of kids that have to work through the system, and as we know, that takes time. Okay, what I'd ask you to do is look this over again. You probably just got it last night or the day before. Review it. What I'd like to do is get your comments in the next couple of weeks. You can send them directly to Mark and to the rest of the council, and then we'll try to get a revised draft if necessary, and then we'll address that at our next council meeting in terms of getting approval for the charter. And Nancy will also comment on it, so she's got to make sure we're doing the right things in terms of meeting her needs too. Okay, the next topic is the advisory group, and I'm going to let Mark take that one on too, because I think that is an important function that we see a value in adding to our team and help us get smarter on many of the issues out there. So Mark, you want to talk about it? But there's a handout in your packet on this.
Yeah, so to refer to the handout there, one of the things that I'd like us to do today is really to agree on the size, purpose, the scope, and representation for that advisory group. It is within the legislation that we have at a minimum representation from the K-12 and the post-secondary perspectives at the table on that advisory group. I think that makes perfect sense to me. As we look around the state and the work that is being done both in the formal education system and outside of the formal education system, that the places that really dovetail and complement our efforts, I put together a list here of various sector representation, kind of very broadly, that I think would be critical perspectives to have to help us do our work better. So I would love to, at this meeting, to get your thoughts on whether or not these are the right people at the table, whether we need more people at the table, and what sort of the criteria and the types of skill sets that we want in that advisory group. There's a tremendous talent pool out across the state doing this work.
Yeah, I'm Kathy Camper from Multnomah County Library, and I would love to see libraries added here, but for some specific reasons. We all know that libraries back up all these educational organizations, but one thing that we're doing is reaching the very people that you want to reach, because people come to public libraries when they're educating themselves and because they want to. And I think that there's a lot we could contribute to this. We're either from a statewide perspective or from a specific library, but also as education is changing, people are structuring their own education, and I think libraries are playing a vital role in that. Plus, we're a community organization that provides space, so that could be a free space for kids to study in, or it could be meeting rooms, or it can be the education that we think of with books and databases.
I'd like to. Well, I mean, we'll probably say the same thing.
Go ahead. Go do it, Dwayne.
Now you're in trouble.
Well, and it's about community engagement, right? So, education and learning happens in many different places, particularly when you're talking about more diverse populations, right? So the ability to have somebody or somebodies at the table who can bring that whole picture into focus. And this is really about more where things are going. And she's absolutely right. I mean, I've seen businesses started in libraries. I've seen collaborations started in libraries. And we're doing the same thing in community centers around the state. So when we get outside of the Portland area, there are going to be other vehicles that people are going to be using to collaborate as well. So I think they would need a seat here.
And that wasn't what I was going to say.
Just say yes, it was.
It was!
Look good.
Libraries are also seeing themselves in a new role. I know that Seattle is, I know that Multnomah is currently in that role, as also being an environment that supports the creation of makerspaces. Makerspaces are incredibly important for children to come in and to recognize and be empowered as makers. And that leads to all of these questions, which is to say, how do I make, and what are the elements? So our future robotics teams can be built by our kids coming into our schools, into the libraries. So the role of making makerspaces in the community is a very important feeder that empowers our children to open the questions and to see themselves and to visualize themselves ultimately being in this career. So I see that libraries as a key one, but not the sole one, as a community-based opportunity to empower these kids as makers.
So let me ask the council again, just as you look at this list, from your perspective, anything else you might see missing? We can get before we make a final decision on this, we could ask we have an opportunity to ask for public comment later, but in terms of the council, anything you see missing on the list? I think libraries is a good addition. Sounds like that would be supported by folks.
So is the youth development, sorry.
Yeah.
Is the youth development council, is that students? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that particular.
This organization is working predominantly with youth that are not currently served within the...
I've heard students repeated over and over again. I think a student representative would be
Right.
They're all levels.
And the obvious equity conversation, who represents more diverse populations in this, and is thinking about that all the time.
Yeah. And you'll see that, I'm sorry, as part of the criteria is both representing geographical diversity, but also with a strong commitment to the equity lens that was adopted by the OEID and has since been adopted by a number of the various institutions across the board with a very, very strong focus with closing the achievement gap.
So Mark, as you drafted this list, did you envision one representative from each of these areas, or maybe up to two, or what was your thinking? Because it gets to be a big group, and I want to understand kind of what your thoughts are, how you manage this in a way that's helpful to the council.
Yeah, so that was the challenge, right? And it was a challenge when making the recommendations for the council itself, because we have a number of great folks out there who would be perfect for this. So yes, students, I love having the students on there, absolutely. I did not put numbers, but when I started looking at our formal education system itself, certainly somebody from the Department of Education was critical. Teachers and the representation amongst teachers. The cultures in elementary schools, middle schools, and high school are all different. We also have this bifurcation, unfortunately, within many of our schools between CTE and the traditional academic tracks. So I would love to see both of those are critical perspectives to have at the table as well. If we look at community colleges, we know that there is the workforce development aspects, there's the actual teaching practices, there's also the student support services that would be fantastic because so many of our students are leading complex lives, particularly those who are attending our community colleges. And if we're not considering that, we're never going to get to 40-40-20 if we don't have these redundant systems and pay attention to why our students and our adult learners who are looking to be reskilled impact this. So the numbers there, we already have 15 or so members. So let's put some boundaries and then prioritize within that. I think once we get to 20 or so, it starts to get pretty unwieldy.
Well, I just want to ask one question. Are these people that are just advisors to us, or are they something deeper? And I ask that because, I'm also a data guy, so I do system dynamics models and things because I won't say it's for fun, but I do talk about these things. And I can know that people's eyes will glaze over when we start having that conversation. However, I like having those resources available, right? So if we wanted to put together a model of what our system looks like and a data-driven change model that I was going to show, would that be somebody that's in this group of folks? Would that be somebody else? Would we have anything like that?
So I think we can also establish any other subcommittees with additional targeted tasks so that we could, if we had, as we develop more specific questions about the system, we can put together, bodies that are able to answer those questions.
I think what you were getting at is important. It's like, really, what's the purpose of this group? Because if their purpose is that they're going to give you some initial feedback or input about, this idea of really restructuring the whole system, that can be done with many more people kind of facilitated with small groups. If the purpose is then after we come up with a proposal, we vet it with an important group, you can have a large group who does that with someone like Bev or someone else facilitating. So I think before you get the numbers, you got to be clear what their role is.
Absolutely. I think from my experience, it's been Board of Advisors are active participants in these meetings. They're here at all the meetings. They're there. They just simply don't have a vote. If this committee needs to bring in experts from any variety of fields, then we need to be able to call those people in as we need them, not necessarily grant them an advisory role, because ultimately you end up with too many people in the room. To that point, one sector representation, again, this is a brainstorming moment. All right, good. Because this polarizes politicians. Oregon Inc., which I sit on, has done very well by itself by having 3 legislative board advisors to help with the politics associated with getting money and funding down the road. It's a double-edged sword having politicians in the room.
Representative Arthur's going to have plenty of
I
time.
know. I love my politicians, but I don't necessarily love all politicians. So long story short, it's an interesting thought, because they are the gateway to the money.
Well, I just to add to that, I mean, if we think about our challenge and we think about all the groups we're going to need to work with to navigate through here, our legislature is, without having that interaction, I see us setting up an obstacle.
And I think that goes back to what Jim was saying before, is that we have to, our job is to create a vision. In some ways, the advisory council is to validate that vision and support that vision. And then we've got to deliver on that vision. And if we don't have alignment with key, with our key political leaders around implementing that, the whole thing, it'll be a house of cards. So I would actually strongly support that, Eric. I think it's a great idea.
Well, you get buy-in as well if they're part of the solution, as opposed to just bringing.
If you think about the advisory group, I think in that light, it's a perfect thing. We come up with something, they take it out to them and have them kind of socialize it with their constituent groups within their, whichever kind of swim lane they're in, and bring us feedback back. So we can reach out farther in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. At least we'll get that feedback coming in. I think to specific work products, I think you're better off to create a task force to do a data study or something like that. And we shouldn't be in charge them for going to do stuff, but really to help advise us on the things we're coming up with. So I really like that model. In that case, you can have a few more, and they don't necessarily have to come to every meeting, but I think they are important in terms of understanding where we're going.
They're ex officio, aren't they, in Oregon Inc.?
Yeah.
We actually, on our Performance Excellence Committee, they're actually members of our committee. And the good and the bad of it is they're part of our committee, so they can help with the decisions. The bad part is that they're not there a lot of the time because their time demands are really huge. But I'll tell you, it's priceless. They could bring things in that we didn't know about, and we can actually incorporate that into our process.
Or this would be ex officio to some extent because they're advisory to us.
So I guess my initial thoughts on this is to try to keep this group relatively tight, but for individuals that can cross many of these requirements, right? So that we're not building, and again, they'll keep this, have a great list teed up at all times of these experts that we can also call in as we deal with these issues. Again, I'm just concerned that if we get too large, we have to get a much larger room and a lot more tables, but the agendas just start to explode.
I just have a question on what is the definition of workforce development, what does that mean? Is that going back to the CTE? How is that?
Or is it work
Seems
systems?
like a real broad
Inc.? Is it,
term.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the-
Oregon Inc.?
Yeah, I was thinking more along the work systems Inc. type of perspectives, but from a community perspective and a statewide perspective there. And really, I was just trying to put these things out here, and I think you're absolutely right. What is the role that we're asking them to play here, and advocacy around that implementation and effectiveness of the strategies that we're going to be moving forward. They would be critical, or should be critical, in terms of getting the word out and making sure we're in alignment and they can bring their broader constituencies along as well.
One of the great challenges we have is the geographical one.
Yep.
And we are here meeting in Portland. You know, this is not a Portland conversation. This is not a Portland Metro conversation. This is a statewide conversation. This involves Medford. This involves Wallowa. And I want to make sure that we are able to continually align statewide, because when ultimately we are back talking to the state legislators about this issue, this cannot be seen as a Portland Metro issue. And so we have our work cut out for us from the very beginning to develop this as and it's not just about the technology industry. This is across all industries, and it's across all regions, and it's across all groups. So that sense of inclusivity is going to be critical for that advisory team, so that we can really be able to marshal their energies, their insights, and also their support when ultimately we have to fund these. These all have to be these initiatives. We can come up with great ideas, but unless we have built that groundwork, we won't be successful.
On that topic, we'll visit the next agenda, but we were thinking as we have meetings, we don't do them always in Portland. We move them around the state so that we get some exposure. It'll be hard for us to travel, but I think it is important that we get out to various parts of the state and maybe even visit some schools where they might be kind of leading in some of these areas so we can see what they're doing. So we get visible in the community too.
Well, I'd like to follow up on that, and this is something we talked about from our Small Business Advisory Council, and that is there is technology in most of the community colleges to allow for conferencing, right? So the ability to meet in a number of these different places, but then also have meetings like this going on in the others, so people can actually interact with and see each other, but also participate in even bigger conversations.
Do you want to ask for some thoughts from the audience?
Yeah, I was going to, before we made a decision here, I want to make sure I got the council's views on this right now. Any other views on the list here? Anyone else think we ought to add something else or anything missing from your perspective?
I just emphasize some of the criteria are more important than others, but one of the key things was also having the authority to make and commit organizations time and effort and money is critical. Otherwise, we're wasting time.
Okay, maybe before we go to the next item, we will ask if we're going to have a period for public testimony or public comment. Maybe this is a good time to do that before we make a decision. I think what we'd like to do is give Mark the kind of head nod with this list with a couple additions that we talked about: student, library. I think library is a good one, and politician as advisor. We'll let Nancy think about that too. You have any problem with that, Nancy?
No.
I think that makes sense. I think because of the need to go to the legislature and we need that strong support and alignment, you just can't educate them in one. We're now ready. We're here. We want the money. They're like, what? Where have you been? I haven't seen you for, So I think we can find the right committee and maybe look at a couple, Democrat, Republicans. So we get bipartisan support on this. Would be good to be politically correct on that one. So we're going to open up for public comment. We're going to do this at all of our meetings, so we allow the public to provide any input. If there's anyone that would like to provide input that's here, you can just state your name. You can just do it from your seat. You don't have to come up. You can kind of watch it. We'll make it a little more comfortable. So we'll just go around the room if there's comments. Yes.
Deb Mumhill, maybe first robotics going on to the university, but still here representing the South Memphis STEM partnership, which I'll be a part of. Been an informal STEM programs for robotics for several years in the state, and it's been fantastic. So the only thing I want to advise you guys is we do a lot of STEM and career development informal, but we get who shows up. We do not have a captured audience. So yes, we have the Asian students and the high math achievers. And so I would just advise you guys, and it's great you have OEIB and OPE, is there needs to be a lot of work done in the classroom to help just parents and students and teachers students understand the importance of STEM and how that ties to jobs and what are the aptitudes. And so there needs to be a really, I think, in my opinion, big push to formal setting where that captive audience is at. And maybe that's where the transformational flip classroom, project-based learning will bring that alive. But when it's listening to your advisory board group, you're definitely going to want that K through 12 voice at the table so that they're in step and sync with everything that you're trying to do. Good luck to you. I think it's fantastic.
Thanks for the work on robotics. I think it's been a great program.
Oh, it's going to continue to go.
I think Benson's having a state competition in March. So.
One of
One
it was
state.
at the Rose Garden.
Yeah.
The other is the first tech challenge.
First tech. Question.
My name is Lainey Block-Wilker, and I'm the founder of Smart Schools PBX. I'm also on the board of Girls Inc., and I'm a parent. And I've been a long-time STEM proponent. I think one of the concerns with this grant-driven model that OEIB is looking at is I think there's a danger of creating more layers of bureaucracy rather than getting the money into the classroom construction. So I'm wondering if you could consider, and just to ground this in classroom realities, there was one computer science teacher in PBS for 11,000 students. Most of our K-8s lack technology teachers. We have the shortest school year in the state and some of the largest class sizes. So I'm wondering, instead of a grant-driven process, if you might consider just putting a robotics coach at every school, or putting a computer science or technology teacher at every school, because the amount of hoops that these organizations, we know that nobody has the staffing to apply for grants, basically. So it's just creating more administration. The other thing you might do is selecting evidence-based programs. I know Mark really knows these programs. I have a 7th grade robotics daughter. It's a great program. Now Science, Girls Inc., these are all great programs. So maybe your group could just vet 5 evidence-based programs that work and place them out of the schools rather than having these grants. And maybe with a concentration on summer programs, because if you're looking at the achievement gap, the greatest cause of the achievement gap is summer learning loss. And since we have 2 weeks less school than the national average, OMSI computer programming camps, Mad Science, Girls Inc., robotics, this would plug the summer learning loss. The other thing I was thinking about is we have 197 educational service districts, and there's been some press on that in the Oregonian about dissolving some of those. And so I'm wondering if we could reallocate funding from those. We have school districts that are opting out because, again, that's just more layers of bureaucracy. So what if we dissolved some of these ESTs and put it toward computer science and robotics and summer programs? That might be a way to really target it toward classroom learning. I think I brought the Willamette Week because there's a cover article on PBS flunk factories, and I know there's a big focus on the achievement gap, but we actually have the widest dropout rate in the nation. And if you see, some of these alternative programs are actually getting 3 times as much money as the traditional schools. So I would say maybe a more constructive focus would be a skills gap. What can we do? And I know Jim Pyro is an alum of Benson Tech. That's a program that really works for non-native speakers, some of the highest graduation rates for minorities in the state, and it's both CTE and STEM. And Benson is currently applying for these CTE grants, but it's only going to get about $200,000, which is really, in terms of effective delivery of services, that makes no sense. Meanwhile, if the governor would just lift the enrollment cap at Benson, you could let another 800 students in there. The money follows the students. You could restore software, electronics, aviation, advanced manufacturing, all the programs have been cut. So, I would just ask you to consider this grant-driven model and look at ways that we can be more effective at getting programs to students.
Thanks for the input. Thank you. Anyone else want to comments?
So I'm Jennifer Davidson from Montessori Northwest, and I would just propose that there are several alternative methods of education that are student-centered and really implementing STEM curriculum from pre-K onward, and that even if there isn't a position on the advisory committee for people coming from health and education, I would suggest that you include them in your experts, because I think there are some really successful programs that are out there that might have some of those issues in scaling up, but they might have some principles and some outside of the box ideas.
I'm sorry, Jim, not to interrupt, but one of the things I saw just on here, so we can maybe head off some, we don't have the, oh, never mind, private universities, I found it, never mind.
Make sure they were there. I've had that conversation.
All right.
Right.
But you're right, and charter schools and
Charter
other
schools,
sort of
yeah,
educated
exactly.
tech schools, open school, those sorts of models, Montessori.
Different thinking here.
Google co-founders are both Montessori kids.
And Amazon.
Maybe we can get them.
There you go.
Get somebody.
We'll get Jeff on the council.
Go ahead.
I'm Alan Goss, I'm on the Cottage Grove School Board, and I ran for the school board because I spent 45 years in education. I quit teaching in the 60s because I knew I didn't know how to teach, and I just had some support to figure out how to teach. But I spent the rest of my life in research and development, school work programs at the Rail over the 70s, and retired as scholarship services coordinator and manager at OSAC. So I pretty much spent my life working with ways to help kids get ahead. And I'm listening to all this, and I'm going to a lot of these meetings because I found the school board. I ran because the individual matures with the dynamics of the tribe. We have isolated the individual, and we've made the tribe and that different bad taxes. And what I like about what OEI is doing, and what the gentleman from this side in particular spoke to, the citizen investment. I really need to see all of this effort, remembering often that if we don't get in the faces of our citizens, and I go to our chambers and our Rotaries and all these people, and I literally get in their faces and say, we need to take care of our babies here locally. Local people learn how to own their mother services. So I like what you folks said mentioning that. The more you invest and look at ways to draw your local citizens into what you're doing. Otherwise, we're them and us again. And I spent 45 years being them and us. And them is still out there. And them. So thanks for being excited.
Thanks for your.
Gerald Smith from Sherwood High School. I'm one of those few computer science teachers around the state.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Six. Actually, there's 6 ESDs in about 197 school districts and high schools, and there aren't enough of us around. The thing is, this is getting grayer, and I'm losing it. And there are many of us are maybe aging out of the business who've grown our program. So I want to. I'm also a track coach. Let me talk to you about hurdles and barriers, because I know about that. If I have a short high school kid trying to run high school highs, it's not going to be successful, and that barrier is going to be significant. But if I get that down to where he can fly over those hurdles, there's still going to be hurdles. That's the nature of that business. We won't be able to eliminate hurdles. We will be able to identify them and navigate through them quickly. And the biggest hurdle, I've been in the business teaching 35 years. And the recent challenge for all of us in the business is the defunding of education. So, and the elimination of a lot of these programs, the electives, has been very disheartening to me, because John Niebergall is a peer of mine teaching at Sherwood High School, and I'll just say this. Our door is open. Anybody walk in anytime and come and see. We have a very comprehensive CTE program, but we fought hard to keep it, and it's not been easy. And many schools have lost their programs and lost their infrastructure as well. So not only do we have a staffing problem when we gear up, we will have an infrastructure challenge in the process. But a positive note, Chris Brooks said the other day, in a Superclass conference, he said Oregon State had 20% increase in engineering students applying this fall. went from roughly 5,000 to 6,000. So that's really good news, folks. And the things that, the models that you're seeing that have been mentioned today are working. They're small pockets of success, but folks, those are working. And so I have a lot of hope. While I've been discouraged about the education business and defunding, I have a lot of hope. I have a lot of hope for your energy and your purpose and focus. The system changes, and I'll just be blunt, we need another $1 billion in order to get the class size down to where a quick story, I taught in '89, I've been around a long time, our class size in Sherwood is 19. And I taught science, and when the class size got to 24, I was incensed that I could not teach science with class sizes over 24 in a lab-based inquiry system. And now, that conversation, we don't have those conversations anymore because our lab sciences are 36 plus. And that is due to increasing class size. So you employers also tell me that I need my students to be able to speak clearly, to write an effective resume, be able to work in teams and collaborate. And that takes a broad liberal arts education. I'm just going to advocate for full funding. STEM, though, our efforts have put us in a position so when that funding valve gets opened, we're in the front row. I have hope.
Thank you. Any other? One last comment.
I just wanted to mention recently I was at a meeting for Park Rose School District, and they're doing research on STEM with, I think, OSU, and they had some very good findings and things that I think you would find helpful. One was that they found that kids succeeded if they had peers that also were interested in that topic. So I would definitely look at what they're finding in terms of models that are working or ways to change.
Thank you, Betty. Were you aware of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Might be something we might get a presentation on.
That's with Lynn Durkin and John Falk out of OSU. That's really working closely with the Park Coast community.
I think.
Introduce yourself. Introduce yourself.
Well, I'm sorry, my name is Lee Chambers from Tomorrow's Airline Museum.
Okay.
There has been a consistent message over the last 6 months to a year. Some of it has been from what the governor has said, what I've heard Nancy, Mark, and a number of individuals said. There is a consistent message out there concerning our educational system and some of the things that it needs. The up-and-coming global workforce and what we need to do to prepare for that, and how Oregon has really taken serious the call to arms in preparing our youth and young adults for that, our kids. And our side of the measure is we want to support a 24/7 environment when there's weekends, when school is out, when it's not summer. There needs to still be, at least in part, a 24/7 environment that our youth and young adults have access to, be it online, be it a physical location or whatever. But I appreciate the consistency in the message that's being talked about in the movie.
Thank you very much. Okay, one last comment, and I hate to cut it off, but we're going to run out of time here pretty quick. So go ahead.
Rudolph, Sherwood High School, tech teacher, shop teacher by training 30 years ago. Thompson mentioned Don Domes at Hillsborough High. Jill Hubbard, former engineer at Intel, is now a high school teacher. Our concern is how are we going to replace ourselves? You mentioned the teachers. The three of us have tried to put together a program to teach teachers to take over for themselves. Be careful with people like that. And the other thing is digital design and fabrication. I'm a shop teacher by training, but I've made the transition. I brought trinkets if you want to see things. And, I've been working with schools in Alaska to replicate what we're doing and ensure we have the 3D, the lasers, the plasma cutters. It's out there. We just need to go see it. So I invite you to come see me at any point in time. Thank you for the demonstration.
Good input. Obviously, there's a lot of good things going on in the state. We shouldn't discount that. The question is how do we get that more pervasive across the state? So let's thank you all for your input. Let's wrap up the agenda. First of all, on this advisory group, I think we suggest adding 3 more slots, if you will, one of the students, library, and politicians. With that, are you okay with moving forward on trying to fill this out. The way we'll do this is Mark will reach out to each of these organizations. We're probably working with Nancy a little bit in terms of kind of the right people, and he'll get us a slate of people that you can probably vet with us just to make sure we know.
Yeah, we've got-
Make sure we got a good balance. I think we got decent on the equity. We got to make sure we hit all the constituent groups so we get broad perspective. And we'll tighten up the purpose of this advisory group, but I really think it ought to be a group that reacts as opposed to research. If we want research done, I think we bring the right people together. These people are going to be, we want some visible people here that are leaders, and they may not want to roll up their sleeves and go do data for us. So, but I think we are going to need that information. So we'll use that as clearly advisory and someone that can react to the work that we do, and also give us feedback. Okay, good. So that's, everyone thumbs up on that?
Yep.
Jessica, you okay with that? Still there?
Yep.
Okay, thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Thank you.
And if you have particular names, please send them.
Yeah, if you have some people you think would really be helpful, kind of thought leaders, and I think we really want to get out of the box thinkers here so we can not just kind of get committed to the status quo. We really want people who have been successful, who are willing to think broader and really make a difference. Okay, last agenda item. So assignments going away before we adjourn is look at the charter. Give us any comments you have on that, and then if you have any names on the advisory group, give us that. Let's talk a little bit about next meeting. We'll probably go out and look for that. First question is 2.5 hours enough time? I mean, this was kind of just an introductory meeting, and it seemed like it was kind of short, but we just wanted to get the folks together, get it organized. I'm thinking probably more like 4 or 5 hours potentially if we're going to dig into some stuff. That's a big commitment, but
Well, I would argue if I clear a day, I clear a day.
Yeah.
It's easier than just having lots of short meetings.
Yeah.
Especially if we're traveling.
Yeah,
Right. As well. And it would be fantastic to have time for some very just open, free-flowing conversation
Okay.
within our agendas.
So let's try to lock in some days to the one day. I agree with that. If we go to different areas, we could maybe go visit. If we could, Mark could find the right places to go visit a lab, to go visit a CTE program, or to visit a science program, something that would help us understand who's maybe doing something a little different so we can see that. Any other thoughts on that?
Are we still thinking this third Thursday of each month?
Every other month.
Every other month, excuse me, is that?
We'll try for that as a start and try to pencil that in and see how that works.
Is that a day that works for everyone?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah.
So we'll try that. Get feedback.
All busy.
Okay.
We'll figure it out.
All right, so we'll get that.
2014 calendar, to be clear right
Well, the key is to
Put
get
it
it
on
on the
there now.
calendar so I
Right.
can move things around it.
So we will get some dates out for, and we'll see how they, we'll send them out and just see how it fits with everyone, and we'll go from there. And then we'll try to look for places around the state. We won't go maybe all the way to Baker City. Maybe that's a long drive. That's maybe too far, but we should go try to look at Pendleton as one area, Central Oregon is another, probably the Medford area.
Perhaps we need to find an advisor who owns a plane.
Just
saying.
Well, I suggest we could drive maybe together, and
There
that
you
might
go.
be a chance for us to have
There you go.
a longer conversation too. So that might be another opportunity for us. Okay.
And then
If we're all in agreement.
Stamp.
Well, and then also, additional guidance on the primary questions that are in front of you now and in front of us now as a council. I think getting very clear on the outcomes is an important, sort of first step, as well as defining, where are the needs within the larger sort of workforce economic system, so that is also fitting in our big picture. We still have some big picture work to do here before jumping into the specific barriers that exist across our system. But that's shortly coming up as well. So if you've got feedback on the priorities for this next meeting, I would love to get those from you as soon as possible.
Okay, so feedback on that, the page called STEM Investment Calendar Topics of Discussion. I do think we have one more meeting just to kind of get dirty with the data, if you will.
Yeah.
Just kind of understand what we've got, what we learned, maybe to get some programs.
We'll title that and put that in the public.
Because some of this
agenda.
data,
Getting dirty with data.
It was the first time I've seen the number of 2%. When you start from a cohort and you end up with 2% STEM. I'm just kind of shocked how low that is.
There's have you seen the leaky pipe?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
the US data,
Yeah.
and that's the one that will show about a 4%, I think.
Right.
At the
Well, I think you have to go upstream and find out why we're losing those children.
Absolutely.
And that's really it. We're losing it because of the system we have. Some of it may be just their natural tendency to go different directions, but how many are being lost because they don't get engaged, they don't learn, they're not getting exposed to the right topics, and that's what we really need to understand. If we're going to make a change upstream, we're not going to see it for 6 to 8 years.
And I'm also working with a number of different partners, Bruce Schaefer, Joe Ishiro, and others, with trying to identify from research in the national conversation about where those barriers already exist in that pipeline from early childhood through middle school, through transitioning into high school, and then in our early college years. So there's already a lot of research out there that we can draw upon as a starting point, and then verify that with our other experiences.
And I would like to argue that this is not just about the data. That's one half of the equation, because the challenge, I would also argue, is that we're not inspiring our kids,
Yes.
right? So I think that not only do we need to be cognizant of the data, but we also need to know what are the stories of success. What are the best practices that have, because this is not an Oregon conversation, this is a national conversation. There are initiatives all around the state, all around the country. Now, whether or not everyone's doing it within a statewide focus, perhaps not, but there are stories of success. And I think we need to find out our stories of success here in Oregon, the work that Stuart has done with T, the work that Don has done, the work that Jill has done. I mean, at Tualatin, down at Tualatin High School, Jill has over almost 150 kids doing her robotics. What is she doing right? These are stories, but this is not just an Oregon story. This is also a national story. So if you can help Mark bring us forward stories of when things are working right, so we can also learn from that.
But more than that, we need to tell the stories and tell them a lot more often than we do, because this is just exactly right. If you don't hear about it, you hear the other stuff.
Well, and that's part of the work as well as a communications platform for us, so that we can sync on messaging, because part of our roles is to be out there working with the public to elevate the importance of STEM and to understand it in a broader and deeper fashion.
Just to be clear, the numbers we're looking at are clearly lagging indicators. We need to get to those leading
There you
indicators,
go.
which is exactly the right way
There
to
you go.
change.
Put
You gotta make
smiles
a
on
difference.
some faces.
That's right.
Yes.
That's clearly the
And that's also where we change the conversation, because it's not about how do we improve our graduation rates. It's how do we prepare the talent for an innovation-based economy.
There you go.
And that's a different conversation.
And that's where we need to focus our time.
Just a small point. Do we have a centralized? Can we get a centralized communication list put together? Phone numbers, email addresses for the council members, and eventually the advisors, so that we can reach out to each other.
I have that as well.
Perfect.
And we'll invite advisors to the next council.
Roger that.
And will there be a summary of the meeting put together in which we can just kind of show what was decided, what decided, so if somebody misses it, then they can get it.
Perfect.
All right, well, thank you very much. It's a great meeting. I look forward to working with you, Nancy. Thanks for your support for this. I look forward to working with you and Mark. We've got a lot of heavy lifting ahead of us, but I think it'll be fun. It sounds your passion towards it.
And with the help of those others in the room as well, and those
Thank
who
you all for
were
coming.
not able to come to
I was surprised to see how many people were here.
Yeah, I wasn't.
I guess that shows the interest in the topic.
I was expecting more.
No, it's just, thank you.
Right.